The dungeon system of extremity. One, it was not Noah Osmont. Around her throne made from a curved infinity symbol, authorities of mana dynamics, entropy, continuity, gravitation, polarity, and all other natural laws swirled along with dreams, Avalon, Elysium, and other decreta. She was adorned in a dress that was half colorless and half radiating pure blue light, her facial features hazy, but they still gave the Cimmerian architect the thought that the beauty was one even she was slightly lesser in comparison to. And in the next moment, her authority reverberated out as her words made it seem like her authority was undeniable. You have information regarding my enemies. Wah! The voice gave the Cimmerian architect goosebumps as simultaneously the same words appeared as prompts in front of her face. Prompts she had been seeing rising and falling this whole time as she received a great shock. She pointed towards the entity on the throne as she continued. You are the manifestation of the infinite hyperversal haven, the quintessential annals of extremity? The Cimmerian architect couldn't believe it. The very domain she was in had such versatility and capability of independence. As if to ascertain her words, even more set of prompts bloomed in first of her eyes. An astounding achievement. You have gained the honor of gazing at the infinite hyperversal haven. If you can prove your usefulness before her, you will climb ever higher on the banner of quintessence. The eyes of the Cimmerian architect became sharp. The entity on the throne didn't open her mouth, and yet she answered her at the same time. The Cimmerian architect felt like she was facing a heavy and sacred entity, as with sharp eyes, she spoke lightly. The ones above extremity, we have records of them dating back eons and eons of recorded history. From the changing tides of the Havenly lineages and clans within the Vitalis domains, to the infernal lineages and factions within the vacuous domains. There have been times where they freely showed themselves before, whether by chance or in passing in front of primogenitors or honored ones, and there have been eons where no traces of them were found. As she spoke, the Cimmerian architect seemed to be recalling heavy details of an ancient past, the entity before her listening silently. The time that showed off their power the most was in front of an honored one who was discussing with his longtime friend about the possibility of reaching the 8th gradation of extremity, and how after rising to such a stage, he may just be able to instantly elevate his main concept to an existential level while having enough power to separate himself from vacuous and vitalis, that there may actually be another path for all of them. And do you know what his dear friend said? Trepidation danced in her eyes as he continued. His longtime friend looked at him and smiled while stating, "Well, we can't have that, can we?" Ah! Such a statement shook the honored one to his very core, as an instant later, all the records in the surroundings shook as the wills of many distinguished primogenitors were pulled to that domain, and they were forced to observe as an entity, about to grasp the 8th gradation of extremity, fell to his knees from a single tap of the entity he had been sharing records with for eons. With a single tap, he was brought to his knees. With another tap, his records and very being were entirely erased. The gazes of primogenitors and other honored ones were drawn there purposefully to observe such a scene, as if they were being given a blatant warning not to reach out where they shouldn't. Thereafter, that entity disappeared before all eyes there and never reappeared again throughout the eons that followed, only leaving behind the sense of awe and fear of the ones above extremity, as after that day, even the discussion of existential extremity authorities apart from vacuous and vitalis were taboo. And from then on, others did their best to move outside of the influence of the ones above extremity, to not be under their gaze as much as possible. At this flow of information, the will of the infinite hyperversal haven radiated glory on the throne as she spoke a singular word. Her eyes shone brightly while stating this, as the Cimmerian architect nodded with surprise while continuing. Yes, many left the Vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains and shifted their domains towards records. They set up shop in recorded or unrecorded histories for those who are truly powerful, as even though the gaze of the ones above extremity may still penetrate through, but it is not as present as within the havens filled with vacuous and vitalis. Within recorded or unrecorded histories themselves, the things one does or speaks about aren't as easily recorded, as one is already living inside records of records. The less of a footprint they leave behind, the more they can move around. The more powerful beings made their homes in records that had occurred eons ago, or in unrecorded histories of events that had yet to even occur. Why was it that no primogenitors could be seen freely within clans or inheritances? Why did entities like the Extremity of Steel or the Hero of Vacuous make their legends within the Vitalis and Vacuous hyperversal domains before they disappeared? They simply did not want to have such a large footprint of records left behind in the eons that followed. Of course, creating a brand new database of records before enacting an existential extremity authority, what Osmont managed. The authorities in the surroundings raged madly as the Cimmerian architect felt a heavy sense of oppression and suffocation all around her. The gaze of the entity of the throne became sharp as the Cimmerian architect couldn't help but curse. Fucking hell, the extremity of infinity. What the extremity of infinity managed to do is something no others have done. And thus, we are where we are today. Since he was being cleansed out of the Vitalis and Vacuous hyperversal domains, if he wants to appear within them again, it may only be feasible through recorded or unrecorded histories. The surroundings calmed as the Cimmerian architect silently cursed. She couldn't refer to the emperor of these lands with his name anymore, lest this will before her become displeased. Chapter 28-24, Dungeon System of Extremity. One woman looked at another. One was a manifestation of a shocking and unfathomable construct, as the other was merely an entity seeking change and truth. The Cimmerian architect had said that if Noah wanted to appear outside of the infinite hyperversal haven, it may only be possible within rest records, where the gaze of the ones above extremity wasn't as pervasive. Of course, his cleansing today should have also been one that was used as a warning. I heard the word ungrateful resound across records in the domain we were in. So solace can be taken that the most recent honored one was likely used as an example and deterrent for others to not even think of doing the same thing. So it may be hard to rally any support from the powerful primogenitors if the extremity of infinity starts wading through records, as if he nears anyone. They may just expose him, as nobody wants to be cleansed out of existence next. We are all seeking ways to overcome the ones above extremity. But when an entity like your master comes along, it is hard to say if he will gain any support from the primogenitors and honored ones who have managed to remain alive in the 7th or 8th gradation of extremity this whole time. And without the support of others who had been trying to fight for eons, I truly don't know how all of this will pan out. The gaze of the Cimmerian architect was difficult. She was trying to see a path forward. How an entity that had managed to expand existential extremity authorities at the 5th gradation of extremity could somehow manage to overcome those who had exceeded the 9th gradation of extremity. Entities who were literally named the ones above extremity. What exactly was above extremity? The moment her words finished, her surroundings began to buzz again as the Cimmerian architect cursed, wondering what the hell happened now. On the blue throne of infinity, the manifestation of the infinite hyperversal haven gazed forward with indomitable splendor as a resolute voice echoed out. The extremity of tyranny, issuing an existential declaration of war, was not putting into account any aid or help from other primogenitors or honored ones. Our victory is not dependent on any others who have been making records for eons without affecting an iota of change. Our victory will be carved into existence with our own means, with the inhabitants of these great lands working to make it into a pristine reality. The moment she finished speaking, she raised her hands up as the whole space became bathed in a shocking amalgamation of light. The Cimmerian architect finding herself thrown out while she cursed as she continued to hear the authoritative voice along with its prompts booming all around her. Quintessence and infinity will pave the way across the 9 gradations of extremity for those who seek brilliance. The extremity of systems expresses its authority and brings to light the dungeon system of extremity as the pathway of the quickest and most efficient tool to traverse across the gradations of extremity. The Cimmerian architect found herself thrown back right where she was initially at, as before her eyes and the eyes of trillions of entities across the infinite hyperversal haven. Such prompts appeared as their eyes were drawn towards the center of these unfathomable lands, near the intersection of the blazing lines of the extremity vein of the infinite hyperversal haven. Elodie, the Cimmerian architect, felt her soul buzz as the figure that had been veiled in blinding lights this whole time could be seen by all of them. His eyes held 9 pupils that swirled with trillions of infinity symbols. His hair was dark, and yet every strand coursed and flashed with a cerulean light of infinity ever so often. His fair skin glowed with stellar might, as his face was sharp and filled with devilish handsomeness. A royal purple robe draped over him like a grand emperor from ancient times, as around him, 9 massive wheels of terrifying light swirled with utmost majesty. Some flashed with a gorgeous cerulean hue, others with a colorless light of quintessence, and others with a glaring amethyst light of tyranny. His mere presence and figure felt suffocating for others to even stare at, as at this moment, his gaze seemed to be sweeping across the infinite hyperversal haven. And everywhere it passed, others inextricably felt their eyes lower just slightly. Those from the 7 clans and major inheritances, the Cimmerian architect and Solarium, Aurelia, Orion, Maximilian, and those of the Lernian lineage, Barbatos, Athena, Henry, and the Emperor Penguin, Dr. Hall, Lilith, and Xiaomi. With the eyes of these beings and trillions more staring towards him, the entity bathed in light moved his hands as the very makeup of reality seemed to be moving and affected by his mere movements. And he tapped the space before him. Boom! The extremity of systems opens the existential raid rift system. Space splintered and cracked open as a massive cerulean rift portal, far exceeding the cerulean instance dungeon portals of infinity in size, bloomed. It was so massive that it seemed similar to the size of one of the havens of the infinite hyperversal haven. Inhabitants of the infinite hyperversal haven can challenge the existential raid rift in varying levels of difficulty for the sake of elevating their power across and into the gradations of extremity. True death is not possible within the existential raid rift, as any entities on their last vitality values will face a false death that disallows them from stepping into any rifts of the dungeon system of extremity for the next 12 hours. For those who manage to overcome and defeat the most powerful challengers within, they will be rewarded with armaments of extremity, Planalith Crystallis, existential skill books, and varieties of loot that will rapidly elevate wanderers across the gradations of extremity and earn them honorariums to be on the banner of quintessence. Shocking prompts came as the hearts of the watching entities beat ever faster. They looked at the massive blue rift as its darkness fluctuated to reveal light. Within the existential raid rift, a shocking scene could be seen. Stretching out for light years and standing atop stellar multicolored floating land masses, millions upon millions of titanic enders of extremity in the forms of majestic beasts could be seen. Dragons, phoenixes, serpents, cheilans, winged tigers, or combinations of such entities. All of them were coursing with 1 or 2 authorities of extremity that correlated with past natural laws or decreta. All were on the first gradation of extremity or higher. Towards the very forefront of these endless legions of enders of extremity, the massive visage of none other than Hyperion could be seen. His body was far faster than all others there, his size exceeding a cosmos as his figure coursed with manodynamics, entropy, continuity, dreams, Elysium, and multiple other concepts burning brightly. He was already emanating an aura grandly at the 4th gradation of extremity, and it seemed to still be rising and nearing the 5th gradation of extremity even now. His draconic elephantine form, full of majesty and valor, gazed out from the existential raid rift and onto the masses, and his trunk raised to bellow out as a crimson gold prompt bloomed before their eyes. The existential raid boss Hyperion welcomes the challenge of those wishing to traverse across quintessence and infinity, for the sake of elevating the power of Noah's existential extremity authorities, for the sake of strengthening themselves against enemies that were currently far, far more powerful than them. A portion of the capabilities of the dungeon system of extremity were unveiled. Chapter 28-25, The Dungeon System of Extremity. 3. A chance for the inhabitants of the infinite hyperversal haven to elevate their existence. a chance for them to attain glory and honor within the existential raid rift as it served multiple purposes all at once. The extremity of loot relishes in the forging of the dungeon system of extremity. Loot caches shall flow in overabundance for those worthy. The scene expressed within the massive rift, the size of a haven, flashed as above the figures of millions of enders of extremity, golden, obsidian, and resplendent crimson-colored treasure chests and treasure caches appeared. They gave off an enticing look as the very souls of entities quivered when they looked at them. Thereafter, the scene within the existential raid rift disappeared as a cerulean radiance bathed everything, its interior a mystery, until those who sought to enter approached it. The extremity of quintessence expresses that there is no need to worry about any forces outside of the infinite hyperversal haven. Their influence cannot reach here. Focus on seeking greater power and glory of your existence. Focus on extremity, and everything else will follow. They had no need to worry about vacuous or vitalist malignancies entering this domain and causing any wars. No distinction of clans or inheritances. No worry of the ones above extremity. There was only the search for extremity. The millions of extremities from different factions looked at each other with heavy breaths at such a scene. Each one held their own thoughts, as at this moment their souls were pulling them towards the dazzling cerulean existential raid rift. In a corner of the infinite hyperversal haven, the visage of Lilith had left the cerulean instance dungeon portal of infinity as she gazed at other portals in the even more massive existential raid rift. There were many choices to choose from, but her soul told her that undoubtedly the existential raid rift would have the most rewards. With its size being akin to that of a haven, anyone could be near its light and majesty. Lilith only floated close to it before a cerulean-bordered box rose in front of her eyes. You can now enter the first existential raid rift of the infinite hyperversal haven. The difficulties available to select are Golden difficulty, Obsidian difficulty, Crimson difficulty, and Tyrannical difficulty. The glimmering test box in front of her was a dazzling one, as just for the sake of seeing more about this system, Lilith went ahead and selected the Tyrannical difficulty. You have selected the Tyrannical difficulty. A minimum of 9,999,999 participants are required for entry into the mode of Tyrannical difficulty, or one can bypass this by expressing power equivalent to the 6th gradation of extremity and test the might of their concepts by going solo. Possible loot that can be obtained in the mode of Tyrannical difficulty: Zenith middle grade armament of extremity, middle grade quintessence planelith crystallis, middle grade infinity planelith crystallis, 3 volumes of the quintessential breath of extremity modus operandi, quintessential set, middle grade armaments, infinity set middle grade armaments, tyrannical set middle grade armaments. Based on your existence, it is recommended for you to start on the mode of Golden difficulty. The chances of meeting a false death within 1 millisecond in the mode of Tyrannical difficulty are 99.99%. You can join the queue if you still wish to participate in the mode of Tyrannical difficulty. 09-999-999. Lilith was speechless at the prompts before her as she gritted her teeth before selecting the Golden difficulty. A minimum of 9 participants, up to a maximum of 9,999 participants are required for entry into the mode of Golden difficulty. Or one can bypass this by expressing power equivalent to the 3rd gradation of extremity and test the might of their concepts by going solo. Possible loot that can be obtained in the mode of Golden difficulty: 10% chance of a low-grade armament of extremity, 10% chance of a low-grade loot, planelith crystallos, 10% chance of a low-grade protagonist, planelith crystallos, 10% chance of a quintessential set low-grade armament, early entry pass, 6-9-999, 3-9-999, 1-9-999. The possibilities of loot were endless, and it seemed like one had to successfully enter, clear, and repeat this raid rift difficulty multiple times in order to gain the truly precious things it offered. With a more powerful party, Lilith gritted her teeth at this as she joined the randomized K. Connections were a form of strength, and she had not forged any. She couldn't be a part of a powerful party with entities like Barbatos, Kazuhiko, or the Emperor Penguin that were always close to the side of the extremity of quintessence. But she could still try and see how far she could rise. With her eyes blazing with flames of hatred, she began a new queue as the party leader, as she would decide how many random entities joined in before she began the raid. Realities like this began to play out all across the infinite hyperversal haven, as nobody wanted to be the last. Those who understood things a little bit more knew that for the greatest achievements, they had to be first. Let's go. In a certain region, the son of the extremity of quintessence came to bathe in the light of the existential raid rift, as behind him stretched out hundreds of the core powerhouses of the infinite hyperversal haven. R.A.! A bellow of pride came from the Emperor Penguin as Kazuhiko, the Kraken, Sword Emperor, Guinevere, and many others followed behind him. He knew his own limits and the limits of those who followed him as the Son of Destiny chose the mode of obsidian difficulty. A minimum of 99 participants, up to a maximum of 99,999 participants are required for entry into the mode of obsidian difficulty. Or one can bypass this by expressing power equivalent to the 4th gradation of extremity and test the might of their concepts by going solo. Possible loot that can be obtained in the mode of obsidian difficulty: 50% chance of a low-grade armament of extremity, 50% chance of a low-grade apocalypse planolith crystallos, 50% chance of a low-grade harems, planolith crystallos, 50% chance of a quintessential set low-grade armament, 10x early entry pass. This information flashed in the mind of Henry and those that followed him as, "You are the leader of a preformed party of 588 participants. You have met the minimum requirement to enter." The eyes of the extremity of destiny flashed brightly as with a daring glimmer, he made the decision for all those behind him. Enter. A blinding flash of light boomed out, and a party exceeding 500 entities delved into the obsidian difficulty of the existential raid rift. Chapter 28-26, The Dungeon System of Extremity. Reality warped and twisted around them as they entered the obsidian difficulty of the existential raid rift and found themselves teleported into a vast and ancient record. Around them, shattered Royal Elysium cosmos floated all around as in the distance, a golden sea seethed with glory. Atop this sea, the auras of hundreds of enders of extremity at the 1st and 2nd gradations of extremity could be seen, with there being dozens of enders at the 3rd gradation of extremity that uniquely took on the forms of the reality Ursidae, infinite willow trees, dragon phoenix, and the astral race. And at the forefront of these enders at the 3rd gradation of extremity, there was actually a man that currently seemed to be steeped in darkness as his hair flowed with an obsidian light, and his eyes shone with a resplendent golden hue of destiny. His stature was made to be larger than even the enders of extremity themselves, as he was a few thousand miles in size, being equivalent to a small world in stature. When Henry, Kazuhiko, Emperor Penguin, and others saw him, their gazes changed to ones of shock as they remembered the extremely handsome face of this entity. They had even hunted down this entity before. How befitting for you to be the first one I come across, O Son of Destiny. The voice of this entity echoed out resoundingly as it ridiculously stood at the 4th gradation of extremity. The extremity of prana flowed across his veins as with any raid boss. His vitality values were greatly inflated as killing him would require blood, sweat, and tears. Tendrils of destiny swirled around him as seeing the shock of his opponents, this entity continued. I am despondent and even more surprised than you all are. I came back merely as a record of my old self. A glimpse of what I used to be after my greatest enemy yet merely sent his son to kill me as he couldn't even be bothered. He had grown so powerful that even if I considered him a great enemy, to him, I was merely an extra. And now, I truly am a quintessential extra that has merely taken the place of an ender of extremity. But even though I am not truly me, even though I am merely a collection of records, the extremity of destiny courses through and resonated with me. As the man spoke, the golden seas below him seethed as the enders of extremity behind him roared. His gaze came to lock onto the Son of Destiny in the distance, as a massive golden spear appeared in his hands. I never reached the extremity of destiny, but it flows across every single part of my record due to the will of infinite hyperversal haven, due to your father's will. And I wish to see whether I truly deserve to be killed by you. I wish to see whether you have simply been riding on the destiny of the one responsible for all of this, or if you can actually forge your own. Wah! His presence was massive and oppressive, as nobody had expected to ever see this being again, nor in such a position of power. Even if he was just a record and not the past being himself, this was still the past true emperor that had reigned in the Age of Destiny. The past true emperor of destiny, the imperial deceiver, Oppenheimer, whom, infused with the authority of an ender of nature, 3 natural laws and 3 decreta flowed through him as at this moment a heavy prompt rose. Prove your concepts of extremity and take down the obsidian raid boss, Oppenheimer. Failure to do so will result in a complete wipeout and restriction of using the existential raid rift for 12 hours. Henry gazed at this prompt as he felt his blood burn. He felt as if his father, he felt as if the very infinite hyperversal haven was testing him. After all, this couldn't be random. And if this was a test, it wasn't one that he could fail. He bellowed out commandingly as those behind him erupted with auroras and blazing auras that glimmered with quintessence or infinity. Rah! An emperor penguin enlarged as with a bellow. It and many others followed the lead of the Son of Destiny and charged towards a golden sea filled with enders of extremity and a supercharged Oppenheimer in the lead. This was the inside of one version, one record of obsidian difficulty. One by one, other parties had begun to enter the golden difficulty as they tested their own power and luck, as at this moment, the usage, refinement, and elevation of the existential extremity authorities under Noah began in full swing. The means of the extremity of systems were shown to be terrifying as it worked intricately with the infinite hyperversal haven to show off a glimpse of its current power. Its shocking means regarding alchemy and blacksmithing weren't even unveiled as currently, just its sheer capability of producing terrifying enders of extremity advanced in the gradations of extremity through its infusion of natural laws and decreta. This alone was enough to make any construct terrifying. But the infinite hyperversal haven wasn't any construct. It was something supported by an extremity vein choir, literally with the shape of an infinity symbol as its pillars of support that were the natural laws and decreta, were all pulled towards extremity, all at the level of quintessential zenith. It then held existential extremity authorities flowing through it and constantly altering its very existence. It then had the quintessential annals of extremity basking it and elevating it to an even greater level. Its origin was a mere spiritual act, yes, but currently it was something that even Noah may have not yet fully ascertained, as what it could currently do was already obscene to ridiculous margins. And in the midst of all of this, MacGuffin rises from its slumber. Outside of the existential raid rift he had just called out, Noah saw this prompt appearing as he felt a part of himself behind to pulse wildly. The extremity of MacGuffin has made its choice. The dungeon system of extremity shall be the first idea, the first construct that future plot will revolve around. The first MacGuffin was chosen in such a shocking manner as even though this was his own will, even Noah was surprised. But in the next moment, even more concepts of extremity surged to support the dungeon system of extremity. The extremity of conquest, plot, apocalypse, devouring, gluttony, Armageddon, wrath, and many others infused their extremity authority into the dungeon system of extremity. The methodology of stripping away the authority of the vacuous and vitalist hyperversal domains begins to unveil itself. The existential dungeon apocalypse feature is coming to fruition. Chapter 28 and 27, the dungeon system of extremity. 5. The feature of existential dungeon apocalypse. Such a resonant prompt buzzed within Noah's mind as multiple of his concepts of extremity surged into the dungeon system of extremity that was deemed a MacGuffin. Its usage was already prominent and of insurmountable importance as the elevation of the existential extremity authorities was planned to occur through it, allowing the inhabitants of the infinite hyperversal haven to go higher and higher with this tool. But now, Its importance and relevance to the unfolding reality and unrecorded history was about to become even grander, to the extent that it would even be capable of affecting the vacuous and vitalist hyperversal domains. The extremity of quintessence, infinity, and tyranny imposed themselves deeply to allow for the function of the existential dungeon apocalypse to come to fruition. The extremity of paradox overlaps its will to reduce improbabilities and mask any possible understanding. The extremity of systems pulsed with fortitude and guide all incoming authorities forward. Parts of him, his will, each of them moved in sequence, as no part of his soul moved unless he willed it, and his concepts of extremity that made up who he was all moved like a well-oiled machine in order to achieve the most stupendous results. The change was hard to see, as it was a conceptual one, but Noah felt it within the depths of his soul. He felt it with his connection to the infinite hyperversal haven, as what his concept sought to do right now was something utterly grand. The cost for it would be a heavy one. The stable extremity vein of the infinite hyperversal haven seethed as the existential extremity authority of infinity within it surged to be used as the source of power. An endless source of power. Quintessence and tyranny layered themselves thereafter to see if the conceptual theory of the existential dungeon apocalypse would be fully realized. It was the 900 millisecond since Noah had begun to stretch his records towards infinity. This single stretch of a second would very soon come to an end, as the things that were accomplished within it were of insurmountable wonder and honor. Boom! Seas of providence and destiny seethed as crimson hyperversal extremity rune scriptures bathed in a golden color mixed and clashed. The obsidian difficulty of the existential raid rift was not an easy one. The enders of extremity taking on the forms of infinite willow tree, reality Ursidae, dragon phoenix, and the astral race were terrifying enough as what the Emperor Penguin, Kazuhiko, Sword Emperor, and many others among the hundreds in the party of the Son of Destiny came to realize they could not get through their defenses. Their bodies coursed with multiple types of past natural laws and decreta. They were representative of the concepts of the extremity of quintessence. A single ender of extremity carrying the decretum of prana was akin to a fortress who received all attacks with ease. And no ender of extremity held just a single concept, as most held 2 or 3 coursing across their existence. Most of the few hundred entrants coming in with Henry were the finest entities originally in the infinite hyperversal haven, before the inclusion of those from the 7 clans and major inheritances of extremity. And the vast majority were just on the upper tier of the first gradation of extremity, with less than 25% reaching the second gradation of extremity, along with their bodies being filled with the lineage of the tyrannical quintessential hyperversal emperor. A semblance of quintessence, infinity, and tyranny flowed through them as this granted them a powerful edge. Those at the first gradation could release power equivalent to the second gradation. Those at the second gradation could match average Tier 3 entities on the scale of the vacuous or vitalis domains. But their enemies this time were those stemming from the very depths of the infinite hyperversal haven. Bred by the very land that gave them power, the Emperor Penguin roared out in shock as while exhibiting rotating obsidian hyperversal extremity rune scriptures of pride that put him on the early steps of the third gradation of extremity. A type of power only possible with the first quintessential awakening, allowing for the rapid proliferation of his rune scriptures, he found himself pushed back by a massive reality Ursidae pulsing with droves of entropy. His circling rune scriptures of pride were shattering and being eroded by the crimson hyperversal rune scriptures of entropy. His very pride was quite literally being put to the test. Boom! And towards the fire area of the battle, in the center of the raging golden sea of destiny and providence, a massive figure of Oppenheimer the size of a small world stood tall above the Halcyon Sea as his massive golden spear dripped of crimson gold blood. Ahead of him, the Son of Destiny lay with his chest split open, his handsome expression dazed as his strands of dark blue hair were stained with blood. His crimson hyperversal rune scriptures of destiny were pierced through. With the golden Ziston of Oppenheimer swirling with thousands of rune scriptures of providence and destiny, He couldn't stop the strike of this raid boss who stood powerfully at the fourth gradation of extremity. The gaze of the raid boss Oppenheimer was a calm one as he spoke out. I am merely a record that has a semblance of the authorities of the extremity of quintessence flowing through me. A semblance of your father's destiny, and you cannot even compare to this mere semblance. What use are you? Why were you destined to share such a connection with a being like him? It would be best if you simply cut yourself off of him as the way you are now. It is a shame to consider you his only progeny. Utterly cold words echoed out. Words that were followed by a horrific action, as the golden spear in the hands of the despondently handsome Oppenheimer began to spin. Providence, destiny, and manadynamics, having their rune scriptures swirl and rotate as a blinding blue and gold light struck down to utterly end the life of the son of destiny and wipe out his whole party from this raid. Chapter 28, The Dungeon System of Extremity, Sex. The words of Oppenheimer buzzed in Henry's mind. The spinning spear, filled with vibrant crimson rune scriptures, only caused his eyes to close. His eyes that turned unyielding. His eyes that began to burn with a semblance of tyranny. With his figure nearly split in half, he bellowed out while activating a single feature. Quintessential entity I form. Unlike many others, he had an overabundance of quintessence flowing through him due to the pureness of his lineage. He called out to it, a form that only those who had undergone the second quintessential awakening could adopt. A form that only he had access to, as at this point in time, all other extremities with the tyrannical quintessential hyperversal emperor lineage had only undergone their first quintessential or infinity awakenings. The number of rune scriptures flowing across your existence have been momentarily tripled. The purity of your tyrannical quintessential hyperversal emperor lineage is extremely high. All rune scriptures momentarily gain the authority of colorless hyperversal quintessential extremity rune scriptures. If your vitality values ever drop below 10% while in this form, you will undergo a quintessential rebirth that returns your existence to its prime state for a maximum of 3 times. The length of time you can maintain the quintessential entity I form will depend on the purity of your lineage. His body shone with glorious splendor before a stellar form of an entity as vast as thousands of miles emerged, his form humanoid and filled with a crystalline, colorless light as his hand reached out to stop the advancement of the roaring spear within the hand of Oppenheimer. An aurora of colorless wings expanded behind his back as they buzzed like a celestial engine. His visage became visible as his skin pulsed with an otherworldly crystalline colorless light. His head cosmic as it only held a pair of eyes that held 9 pupils spinning gloriously with a multicolored light. Thousands of colorless, hyperversal, quintessential extremity rune scriptures of destiny began to swirl around his body. He stared at the raid boss ahead of him as with simmering emotions, Henry uttered out, "Interminable destiny." Behind him, endless rivers of destiny began to manifest and buzz with an interminable light of power, their brilliance now backed by colorless hyperversal quintessential extremity rune scriptures, as like rivers of reality intent on establishing the hegemony of the Son of Destiny, they thundered down unto the raid boss, Oppenheimer. At such a show of power, Oppenheimer's gaze was cold as tens of thousands of colorless hyperversal quintessential extremity rune scriptures began to gather around him as well. During the rise of my past self in the desolate mausoleum, I targeted one dimension in particular the most. You know which one this was? Sandy gold light began to buzz around Oppenheimer in addition to golden seas of destiny and providence, an authority that could turn dreams into a reality. A dangerous thing that I sought to snip off quickly, and now, through the grace of your father, it flows through me. In opposition to the interminable rivers of destiny cascading down from the attack of Henry, miniaturized cosmos filled with the colorless, hyperversal, quintessential extremity rune scriptures of dreams, supported by destiny and providence, began to manifest gloriously around Oppenheimer, their number ballooning up to hundreds as they entirely covered the halcyon skies of this domain. In the distance, the figures of the Emperor Penguin, Kazuhiko, and others who were already struggling in the hands of the terrifying enders of extremity were forced to look up as the scope of this attack was so wide that when it thundered down, it would very likely encompass them as well. Conjuring an ultimate skill, the raid boss Oppenheimer emanated an aristocratic light of grace and majesty as his will bore down. The purpose of this record of mine here is to test you, but plan to bury your destiny in a haze of dreams so deep that it will never rise out of its slumber.
Wah!
With indomitable might, the ultimate skill of the raid boss Oppenheimer thundered down as an area of attack that covered the whole expanse of the domain. It was a light that brought shock and disbelief at the unbelievable level of power displayed by the raid boss of the Obsidian difficulty. It was a light that would result in the wipeout of the party of hundreds that followed the Son of Destiny. It was a reality check that unless they advanced and attained means that were truly quintessential, they would not be able to stand proudly in the wake of what was to come. Outside of this challenge of the Obsidian difficulty of the existential raid rift, in a domain inaccessible by the masses, with entry allowed only to those granted and one entity who could freely go in and out, seas of the past natural laws and Decreta seethed with power and pulsed with more authority every passing millisecond, and a cerulean throne in the shape of a curved infinity symbol could be seen as atop it, a manifestation shrouded in waves of colorless, cerulean, and amethyst tendrils of power sat down serenely. Her gaze was a calm and calculating one, as all around the current throne, illusory screens depicting the scenes occurring across multiple records entrenched within the quintessential annals of extremity were playing out. One illusory screen showed the terrifying screen of the party that the Son of Destiny had entered, with be entirely wiped out, his figure being the only one remaining, as he underwent a quintessential rebirth 2 times over at this point. The manifestation of the infinite hyperversal haven was calm at this scene, as she watched it with impartiality. What she wanted to do was to cultivate existences worthy of the Master's path and concepts. Existences who could innovate on their own and not simply rely on what he could grant them. At this moment in time, they were all still subpar. None would come to be as bright as the Master, but they at least needed to show their own unique brilliance. Otherwise, they would only be left behind. So she watched on calmly as the Son of Destiny radiated waves of power, seeking his best to prevent it, but even his third quintessential rebirth was used up, as ultimately, he also faced a false death. The first challenged existential raid rift of the Obsidian difficulty failed. It was within the expectations of the infinite hyperversal haven. If others truly wanted to gain exponential power, they would have to grind from lower difficulty raid rifts over and over again, accumulate caches of loot to elevate their existence, and only then could they think of overcoming the enders of extremity that held in the existence. Quintessential zenith concepts of extremity, ones that were dead paths to expand for others, ones that the extremity of quintessence brought to their current stage. Did they truly expect to defeat such concepts with 2 or 3 of their own that had attained extremity? The eyes of the manifestation of the infinite hyperversal haven were bright, as at this moment, her voice echoed out. You will preside as the raid boss of the tyrannical difficulty. Her voice was a commanding one. She wasn't alone currently in this domain, as another figure radiating shocking authority was behind her throne. The figure was silent at the command of the infinite hyperversal haven, as a hint of defiance and power could be seen in their eyes, but eventually, they gave a nod nonetheless, as waves of crimson gold light pulsed with majesty. Understood. Chapter 28-29, The Existential Dungeon Apocalypse 1. The manifestation of the infinite hyperversal haven spoke in a commanding tone towards an entity floating behind her throne, as this entity nodded with a hint of understanding and defiance. She was currently here as her own manifestation, her true body being located in the very depths of the infinite forge of the eternity of extremity. Her true body that had undergone such tremendous levels of transformations as currently, existential extremity authorities were branded onto her very being. She wasn't the ruined blade any longer. She was the existential sword of quintessence, ruination. Her hair burned with a crimson gold light as a fiery red dress draped over her manifestation, her pupils radiating a colorless light as the rims of her eyes pulsed with blue. Her skin was tinged with runic lines all around that radiated a royal purple light, a light of tyranny that supported her defiance towards the infinite hyperversal haven she had completed with long ago. But at this moment in time, Ruination could no longer deny that she had lost in that completion. The infinite hyperversal haven had grown to the extent that it was indispensable to the Master. After its connection and enactment of the quintessential annals of extremity, and the lead role it was currently taking to support the Master, the result was a clear one. But she still held her own uses and capabilities of great impact in what was to come. As the existential sword of quintessence, her capabilities to multiply loot had grown to a terrifying level that at this moment, she affirmed the reality that as a zenith quintessential middle-grade armament of extremity, she could multiply middle-grade armaments of extremity and middle-grade planolith crystallos. This was just one of her capabilities, as when it came to the loot to be utilized as rewards for the existential raid rifts and for the empowerment of their master, she would also be indispensable. When she thought of this subject, her fiery eyes gazed at the throne before her as she asked calmly, "Have you begun to produce the armaments of extremity and planolith crystallis? The first set of beings to clear an existential raid rift may appear soon. The loot for the beings who were powerful and intuitive enough to actually kill a raid boss had to be there for them. And the infinite hyperversal haven seemed to have planned for everything as she nodded without an ounce of emotion. The quintessential dowager is overseeing the production of planolith crystallis in the existential extremity alchemy hall. I am taking the lead in the production of everything else within the existential extremity blacksmith's forge. All products will be funneled to you here to be multiplied." The quintessential dowager, the mother of the extremity of quintessence. Ruination heard these words as she nodded, different parts of her existence going to different domains at this moment as she accepted the boons that came with taking on the role of the raid boss of the tyrannical difficulty. For those who would face her, she could only utter prayers for them. For they would be facing a part of the strength of the very extremity of quintessence, in a region of the infinite hyperversal haven. The Cimmerian architect gazed at the dazzling blue rift portal as she uttered out with sharp eyes, a means to elevate and challenge those encompassed by the existential extremity authorities, without resorting to endless cycles of war. She thought of the endless wars between the vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains. One side killed another constantly, as through the fires of war, powerful entities rose and fell. But at the end of it all, it was only vitalis and vacuous hyperversal authorities that benefited. The extremity of quintessence went a different direction and designed a construct that did not jeopardize the records of those involved, and they could choose to enter or not as their path was in their own hands. The Cimmerian architect loved to make comparisons, as so far, this entity she didn't fully understand seemed to be going in a unique direction. While she perused the information herself, a voice perked up behind her. "Do you want to try the crimson difficulty of the existential raid rift together?" Beside her, Extremity Solarium voiced out calmly as Elodie blinked her eyes while turning towards her. This entity was one she was fighting with hundreds of milliseconds ago, and yet now, there was no distinction between them. Their vacuous or vitalist origins did not matter in these new lands, as Solarium knew this well, and whether she was forcing herself or not, she reached out towards the Cimmerian architect calmly. A moment later, Elodie shook her head with a smile. That big draconic elephantine entity is likely in there, with the more hidden records that I can peruse also showing the appearance of some Archlich. My intuition tells me a dozen or more tier 5s needed to possibly clear it. I can't even guess what lies at the tyrannical difficulty, but that should be fun when you step into the 6th gradation of extremity, or if you have hundreds of tier 5s with you. The words of the Cimmerian architect were shocking ones, as this was only her intuition and may not be fully accurate, but she always trusted it for the most part, as a moment later, she chose a difficulty herself and disappeared right after. She went solo. Her reality flashed as she felt herself crossing records. And a moment later, she stood in a domain above a halcyon sea seething with power, fractured golden cosmos floating all around as a huge legion of enders of extremity lay ahead of her. And at the forefront was a regal aristocratic man the size of a world that gazed forth coldly. You have chosen the solo mode of the existential raid rift. If the raid is cleared, rewards will be even more substantial. Prove your concepts of extremity and take down the obsidian raid boss, Oppenheimer. Failure to do so will result in a complete wipeout and restriction of using the existential raid rift for 12 hours. The Cimmerian Architect, an entity at the 5th gradation of extremity, and one who was particularly powerful in this stage, chose to go solo on the obsidian difficulty that held a raid boss at the peak of the 4th gradation of extremity. Chapter 2830, The Existential Dungeon Apocalypse. Who? Elodie's face was filled with seriousness as she felt the vibrant concepts of the extremity of quintessence coursing through the large raid boss in the distance as she took it very seriously. She knew that in this new landscape, she had to quickly claim position and power if she wished to climb through the ranks and fully utilize the existential extremity authorities enacted by the extremity of quintessence. A great chance and opportunity lay here. Something beside Vacuous and Vitalis, and she had joined its camp as she didn't just need to hold a high position within these lands, she also had to make sure the bid to overturn Vacuous and Vitalis would succeed. It was a daunting task when she thought of going against the ones above extremity, but someone had to. She may as well make the stand. Let's go. Boom! A heavy and ecstatic battle began, in another record, within a record of the golden difficulty. Shattered clocks the size of cosmos were stretched out in a stellar domain as purple rivers of time flowed chaotically all around. In the flat surface of one titanic purple clock, a few thousand entities at the 1st and 2nd gradations of extremity were clustered as they stared ahead at a shrouded force of thousands of enders of extremity. At the lead of this party of 9,999 was none other than Lilith. Even though she didn't have any strong connections, there were many others like her in these new lands, as her queue had filled up rapidly, and she waited for the maximum number of participants to fill up before she entered the golden difficulty of the existential raid rift. There were many foreign entities that she didn't know all around her, and above her figure, the banner of the party leader shone brightly as she radiated a commanding air. She was a dimensional Hellion ruler in the past. She had led vast armies and commanded powerful entities of her time. The air of a commander never left her as she looked at her forces and tried to do what every commander did: pick out the talents and who would be of greatest use in battle. Her extremity of hatred selected multiple people in her line of sight as her eyes squinted when not too far behind her left side. She saw an exceedingly beautiful young woman with a crimson gold horn on her forehead and a fiery gold armament. The power she emanated was unique, as she even held a sense of fanaticism when she looked around her. "You are?" Her words reached the young woman and shook her out of her focus as she replied calmly. "Ayame." Ayame cut herself off and didn't finish her words. She was no longer Ayame of the infinite extremity. As she felt the traces of genuine infinity flowing through her, she fully affirmed her new path of belonging as she utterly firmly. She could read records intricately as when she saw the rewards of the existential raid rift laid out, she knew that the contribution and effort that a being out would be reflected in its rewards. If she remained anchored into the 3rd and 4th gradation extremities of the past infinite extremity that had arrived in these new lands with her, she would simply be riding their coattails and not obtain genuine power and rewards herself. So she expanded her breadth and joined a random queue of the golden difficulty. And now, here she was. She gazed at the party leader named Lilith and nodded towards her as before their eyes, a prompt rose. Prove your concepts of extremity and take down the golden raid boss, devilish time unveiling. Failure to do so will result in a complete wipeout and restriction of using the existential raid rift for 12 hours. Shrouded legions became clear. Thousands of massive enders of extremity were revealed. They ranged from pristine dragons, white tigers, and phoenixes at the 1st and 2nd gradations of extremity. With the raid boss of this record being a titanic entity who was was in the form of an emaciated skeleton and adorned in a purple robe, radiating the vicissitudes of time, as his aged face showed shrewdness and might. His hands grasped a buzzing armament of extremity in the form of a purple and golden dagger, reminiscent of the dagger of time that Noah fought the devilish Time Unveiler for in the past. Rune scriptures of time, chronos, and continuity flowed around the massive body of the devilish Time Unveiler as he grasped the dagger of time and smiled with longing, his voice echoing out grandly. Stop! The same word he heard the extremity of quintessence utter before his records came to a complete halt, what seemed like ages ago. He uttered it once more as a purple gold light erupted out, reality being brought to a halt in this whole domain, as the challengers would have to struggle to even move in an area of stopped time. In the distance, the gaze of the Daughter of Hatred was cold as the air of a commander radiated around her. On me. What? In this record as well, a hectic battle began with a bang. It was now the 999th millisecond after Noah stretched out his records towards infinity. The quintessential annals of extremity have reached a profound culmination and successfully forged into existence. An achievement that can only be termed quintessential. Within a second of infinity, you have made achievements others could not make for eons. The existential extremity authority of infinity has been greatly elevated. The existential extremity authority of quintessence has been greatly elevated. The existential extremity authority of tyranny has been greatly elevated. An array of prompts cascaded over Noah's eyes as within a second, he underwent so many shocking changes that other beings could not even imagine. The authority of existential dungeon apocalypse, supported by 3 existential extremity authorities and other concepts of quintessential designation, has fully come to fruition with limitations and rulings that allow for the possibility of a truly quintessential future. The effects of the 17th boundary layer of infinity have come to an end. 1,000 milliseconds had passed since Noah had stretched his records towards infinity. Chapter 2831, The Existential Dungeon Apocalypse. 3. The effects of the 17th boundary layer of infinity came to an end. It was a layer that enacted something which brought about heavy consequences and sets of choices for a period of 1 second. And in that passage of 1,000 milliseconds, reality had so drastically changed that Noah went from being a resident of the vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains to being cleansed out of it, attaining extremity, separating the infinite hyperversal haven from the records of the aeonic annals of extremity. As due to the quintessential annals of extremity, it now sat in a state of existence and non-existence. Too many things had happened in this 1 second. But even with all of this, Noah was just getting started. Over 50% of all operational costs of the existential extremity authorities of quintessence, infinity, and tyranny will have to be directed towards the feature of existential dungeon apocalypse to allow what it seeks to be actualized in reality. The feature of existential dungeon apocalypse seeks to cause the emergence of existential dungeons in the domains of other existential hyperversal domains. At the time of emergence and thereafter, an absolute existential authority and limitation will be enacted. The first absolute existential authority and limitation is that the native existential hyperversal authority and invading existential hyperversal authority will have no effect on the emerging existential dungeon. The second absolute existential authority and limitation is that the primogenitors, controllers, originators, influencers of the native existential hyperversal authority and the primogenitors, controllers, originators, influencers of the invading existential hyperversal authority will not be capable of entering the existential dungeons. The third absolute existential authority and limitation is that only the inhabitants of the native existential hyperversal domains and invading existential hyperversal domains can fight for hegemony and dominion in the existential dungeon. Once an existential dungeon emerges, it will devour and assimilate the surrounding authorities, existences, and reality. If the native existential hyperversal domains wish to stop this process, their inhabitants will have to enter the existential dungeon and eliminate all entities within that contain a signature of the existential dungeon. After a sufficient time passes without all invading entities within the existential dungeon are destroyed, a dungeon break will occur and release an explosion of authority that devours all records of existence of 1/100th of the invaded existential hyperversal domain. A heavy set of rules and limitations. But it was the only way Noah and the concept supporting him could see to achieve a realistic and achievable purpose of the existential dungeon apocalypse. The first point was to make it so that after its emergence, Noah's quintessence, infinity, and tyranny could not have any effect on the existential dungeons. And this same limitation was applied to the vacuous and vitalist hyperversal authorities, as no dazzling scripture or thundering light would be capable of destroying a recently appearing existential dungeon. This was Noah and the infinite hyperversal haven delving into one of the true usages of existential extremity authorities. Absolute existential authorities. Absolute existential limitations. For one to have an astounding authority, they could place upon themselves an equally astounding limitation. For the absolute existential authorities and limitations that should make the future of existential dungeon apocalypse possible, this was why over 50% of all operational costs of Noah's existential extremity authorities were required. But what it could achieve was something stupendous. Noah himself, as the originator of his existential extremity authorities, would not be able to descend within an existential dungeon, nor would any of the originators or controllers of the vacuous and vitalist hyperversal authorities. So, who would fight on Noah's behalf? And who would fight on the behalf of the ones above extremity? The amount of power both sides could unleash would be dependent on just how strong the existential extremity authorities of their domains were, and how powerful the inhabitants within would be. This was Noah's design. This was his construct. Soon enough, he would have to see just how it would unfold when it was applied and laid out in reality. But before that, he had many things he needed to do to prepare. One was to wait for the inhabitants of the infinite hyperversal haven to acclimate and grow much stronger through the existential raid rifts. And the other was Noah himself. Understanding and quantifying the current state of his body, origin, and soul, rising as high as he could across the gradations of extremity, and continuing to elevate quintessence, infinity, and tyranny. And of course, the convergence of his concepts that had now reached extremity into profound dynamis of extremity. What would indefatigable be after the influence of vacuous hyperversal authority would remove? Where would Lotra, Thanatos, or Oraculum now be at? All of these things were under his consideration, as at this moment in time, a second after he had stretched out his records towards infinity, he gazed out at the vast infinite hyperversal haven around him. Its current Alethian havens that were elevating in grandeur and majesty even now. The buzzing extremity vein causing all havens to rotate as if they were mere constellations. The cerulean instance dungeon portals of infinity. The massive existential raid rift. All of these things were his accomplishments, as he was truly just getting started. As his gaze passed over everything, his eyes twinkled as he came upon the figures of Barbados, Adelaide, and a few others who were nearing the light of the massive existential raid rift. When it came to the progress and workings of this construct that would stay his existential extremity authorities, Noah knew the infinite hyperversal haven was more than enough, as through their connection, he already knew of every single happening within it, the loss his son and some of his closest vassals faced, the past members of the 7 clans and major inheritances, as they acclimated to this new reality. And now, there were beings like Barbados, Adelaide, and Athena, those affected by the extremity of harems as their power was greatly inflated to be a portion of Noah's. With all of this power, what exactly would they be able to achieve? Chapter 2832, The Existential Dungeon Apocalypse. In the rims of the light of the existential raid rift, the figure of Barbatos was pulling Adelaide along, the frozen queen sighing as the necromancer of chaos wasn't taking no for an answer. Sis Adelaide, you may not be able to do it if you don't come as well. And isn't it fun to play with reality-shaking power every now and then? Since we have it now, we can't just sit idle. Barbados' gorgeously small but blessed figure spoke with strength as for this occasion, she made sure to have even the frozen queen who didn't care much about power participate. She was adorned in a dazzling black dress, while Adelaide had a snowy blue relic wrapped around her. Their figures followed by Caitlin, Athena, Xiaomi, Eowyn, Tiamat, Anna, Halcyon, and Valentina. They were the entity who were closest to the extremity of quintessence, and those chosen by the extremity of harems to exhibit 50% of his power. At the words of Barbatos, Adelaide gave in with a smile while looking at the massive raid rift ahead of them, her red lips parting to reply. "Since you collected all of us here, I can only think that you're about to do something crazy like choose the highest difficulty." The frozen queen knew the women around her well as the moment her words finished. The figure of Barbatos patted her blessed chest with pride. "Isn't it going to be fun? It feels like we're given a huge cheat compared to others, as if we successfully clear it, all names below Little Fish will be ours." Tempting words left her mouth as the women behind him turned contemplative, with Eowyn rising her brows as her sandy gold hair flowed with majesty. "And if we fail in the highest difficulty?" A valid question was asked, and the figure of Barbatos harumphed as she replied while communicating with the light of the existential raid rift. You think Little Fish would actually allow it for us to die, even if it's facing a false death? If he allows it, he won't be getting any from me for at least 12 hours. Barbatos spoke strongly as she clenched her fist with determination. She turned around to the women behind her, who were rolling their eyes as she continued. "That goes for you all too. If Little Fish somehow allows for us to be killed, hold out for at least half a day." The necromancer of chaos made her position be known as, "Let's just enter and see what we're facing," said Barbatos. The war princess Athena spoke out with blinding battle intent as she wanted to see. Just how tremendous was the power of the man they relied on? She wanted to know. Around her and all others, 9 illusory wheels of light circled them as her body felt like it was coursing with endless power. She always aspired to understand the depth of power of the man she had given her heart to, as now she wanted to let loose. Barbatos smiled gleefully at her reply, as after ascertaining the gazes of all others, she made her selection as their figures became wrapped in the grand purple light of tyranny. The tyrannical difficulty of the existential raid rift has been chosen. This booming prompt echoed out across the infinite hyperversal haven as the wills of many entities, or their extremity clones that had not entered the existential raid rift, gazed upwards. Around this same time, the figure of Henry, Kazuhiko, Emperor Penguin, and others who had faced defeat in the obsidian difficulty were thrown out of the rift with dazed looks, their defeat eyes also rising and seeing the massive prompt changing to form an illusory screen as massive as the existential raid rift below it. On this screen, fiery crimson-red light flashed as a scene was shown within for all others to witness. Atop a massive crimson infinity symbol the size of a large lord, the figures of Barbatos, Adelaide, Athena, Eowyn, Xiaomi, Caitlin, Elena, Tiamat, Anna, Halcyon, and Valentina. Around them, different colored dignity symbols of the same size and stature floated grandly as they looked like stellar bodies in starry space, and far, far ahead of them, on top of an even bigger royal purple infinity symbol, there was the visage of a woman adorned in a crimson and gold battle armament that gave off a feel of impressive middle-grade armament of extremity. But if one were to look closer, it wasn't that what she wore was giving off the pressure of such an armament, but it was her whole body that was emanating such a feeling. She was the entity who had been within a core area of the extremity of quintessence while he underwent his transformations. The relic that began all of this, she was just a ruination, the extremity of ruination. The existential sword of quintessence, the zenith quintessential middle-grade armament of extremity, the raid boss of the tyrannical difficulty of the existential raid rift ruination. Her gaze was cold as she looked at the distant infinity symbol that Warwind stood on. There were no enders of extremity around her as in this domain. She was a lone boss. In the distance, the figures of Barbatos and others had their gazes change as they felt an overwhelming sense of pressure pressing down onto their existence, all of them recognizing the distant figure of ruination as Noah's weapon as at this moment. Her gaze became interlocked with all of theirs. The existential sword of quintessence looked at the harem of the extremity of quintessence, her lips opening with calmness and serenity as she uttered out, "Are you worthy?" 3 words, a simple question. but it was one that boomed in the souls of the harem of the extremity of quintessence as they heard many different things from these words. Are you worthy of his grace? Are you worthy of being beside him? Are you worthy to stand on the precipice of power in the infinite hyperversal haven? These were the words they heard in their hearts as collectively all of their eyes turned fiery. At such words, Adelaide floated to the forefront as her blue eyes burned with determination. Colorless, hyperversal, quintessential extremity rune scriptures beginning to swirl around her as the extremity of plot was activated. I was always worthy. Ecstatic power emerged an instant later as blue light flashed, glaciers erupting in front of her along with a storm of snow and ice that carried destructive extremity rune scriptures forward. Chapter 2833, The Tyrannical Difficult. She was always worthy. Adelaide stated these words powerfully, as in the frozen lands of her home, Noah discovered the spiritual lands. This was where everything began. She had been with him side by side, as she didn't wish for any honor or power, just eons of happiness and companionship. Was she worthy? She was always worthy. Boom! With her bidding, cerulean hyperversal existential extremity rune scriptures flourished and caused glaciers of unfathomable proportions to form and proliferate outwards, turning into malleable waves of cold light that barreled to surge and overwhelm the lone figure of illumination. A figure that gazed at the incoming surge of power calmly as her hand pointed out, and her fingers tapped. Thousands of colorless, hyperversal, quintessential extremity rune scriptures flashed as a crimson light of illumination gleamed. The incoming glaciers of frozen might were stopped in their place before they soon began to shatter, destructive might washing over them, as everything that Adelaide had thrown out was negated right away. You may be worthy, but you know nothing of hardship, nothing of the power you hold in your hands. The voice of ruination was cold as she snapped her fingers thereafter, her body beginning to course with existential extremity authorities, as all around her, dozens of massive, illusory armaments of extremity began to appear. They continued to proliferate until they reached the full 100, and each one emanated a genuine aura of a middle-grade armament of extremity. Massive swords, hammers, scythes, flails, spears, bows, shields, bats, and rifles radiated their own light of power as a single feature of ruination was activated, a feature that was simply known as existential armament armor. Moving autonomously, the 100 illusory middle-grade armaments of extremity pulsed and shot out from the infinity symbol. Ruination stood on, surging towards their targets who were spurred by the words and actions of ruination. Yeah! Barbatos bellowed out with blazing eyes as the space behind her split to release the blazing auras of 3 titanic undead that each emanated auras of the 5th gradation of extremity, with a bony throne forming behind her as necromancy was unveiled with grandeur. Eowyn breathed out as a sandy gold light of dreams covered her, chains of dreams blooming with her at the center and striking out. Athena grasped the spear in her hands as the war princess felt the many authorities flowing in her and called out to a single one. The spear in my hands has always been a middle-grade armament of extremity. The extremity of plot was activated. A blaring, illusory light of a middle-grade armament of extremity emerged from the spear in the hands of the war princess as she grasped it tightly before shooting out towards the descending legion of armaments. The visage of Caitlin was calm as the light of endless mirrors was reflected in her glazed pupils. Her calculating eyes flashed as her body buzzed with the extremity of plagiarism, shocking words leaving her mouth. Why is my weapon over there? Whoa. Reality bent and distorted. A moment later, an illusory middle-grade armament of extremity in the form of a sniper rifle appeared in front of her and altered its size. She grasped it naturally as if it was always hers, her pupil lining up with the scope as she pulled the trigger and caused a beam of extremity rune scriptures to shoot out like a cosmic cannon of light. Each woman tried to familiarize themselves with the unique power flowing through them and utilize it to bring about an ecstatic result. The extremity of harem watching preserved expectations. Above all of this shocking reality playing out, the concept watched what was unfolding as a great battle that would showcase the power of terrifying. Concepts of extremity bloomed. It was being broadcasted above the massive cerulean existential raid rift as many eyes were drawn to it. Power they hadn't yet thought possible being unveiled before them. In another part of the infinite hyperversal haven, a golden construct with archways and pillars lining it could be seen floating serenely, rivers of quintessence, tyranny, and infinity flowing around it, and surging every now and then, as within the depths of the many tall golden pillars supporting this construct, astounding things were occurring. The figure of a beautiful middle-aged woman could be seen within as she stood in front of multicolored cauldrons by the dozens. Cauldrons that were systematically drawing in their own unique authority. This figure was none other than the quintessential dowager, as she oversaw the progression of the alchemy hall and its current task of producing planetary crystallos. Refined and extremely pure version of compressed extremity authority that when devoured, it could aid one in the progression of the gradations of extremity. Amelia Osmond smiled as she came in front of one cauldron that radiated golden-colored light, her hands waving forth and causing the lid of the cauldron to fly out as from within. 9 golden pills of light, spotless, arose as they emanated profound waves of providence. She blinked with a sense of awe as one of them fell in her hands. 9 low-grade Providence Planolith Crystallos. Are you sure this is fair to others? How does the production of Planolith Crystallos actually go for those within the Vitalis and Vacuous hyperversal domains? Her focus was serene and calm as she asked, and in the next moment, a respectful voice of the infinite hyperversal haven cascaded down from above as there was a reply. From records glimpsed before, entities at the 5th or 6th gradation are the ones who gain enough capability to begin undergoing Planolith Crystallos refinement. Tremendous concentration is required, along with the subtle refinement that would fail at any time. Amelia Osmond heard this and she couldn't help but smile. She looked at the hundreds of dazzling cauldrons within the alchemy hall as she shook her head with a smile. And yet my son has you capable of forging the Planolith Crystallos of dozens of extremity authorities all at once, with 9 low-grade Planolith Crystallos being produced on the low end as for some. She waved her hands towards a nearby cauldron that was radiating a particularly profound royal purple light, its lid flying off as from within. 3 dazzling iridescent amethyst middle-grade tyranny Planolith Crystallos bloomed. Chapter 2834. Love that cannot be repaid. The quintessential dowager gazed at the 3 dazzling royal purple-colored middle-grade tyranny Planolith Crystallos as her eyes were filled with a sense of brilliance. The best possibility is even something as great as this. Low-grade Planolith Crystallos could be forged en masse. When she saw such a scene and was also exposed to records of how other entities had had to refine things like this, Amelia Osmond couldn't help but feel her heart overflowing with pride. The one who made all of this responsible was none other than her son. She gazed at the many dazzling cauldrons constantly drawing in authority as she asked to the open space around her. Do you think he knows how proud I am of him? The quintessential dowager said such words as her eyes were full of contentment for how far her son had come. Yet her words were so striking that even the infinite hyperversal haven didn't reply right away, its voice only coming out milliseconds later. I'm sure he knows, but it would not hurt to tell him. The pride of a mother seeing their child do so exceedingly well. The impossible mission of a son to pay back all the grace from their parents for raising them. Amelia Osmond had toiled for months while the extremity of quintessence was in her belly. She went through the difficulty of childbirth with the technology of their time, as after that, she raised him from a little baby that couldn't even protect itself. The late nights of picking up night shifts to support her family, hoping that his father would not get drunk enough to not even be capable of looking after him while she was at work, just until she came back. When she did come back from her shifts as the sun rose, the yelling she had to endure as her husband told her how Noah's crying had kept him up all night. How she had to feed him, change him, and cover his ears to not hear the yelling and arguments constantly occurring around him, making sure to always show a smile on her face even as tears trickled down her face. She had to show her son a trace of happiness, even if there wasn't any. This was a mother's love, and it could never be repaid. Ah. Amelia Osmont shook her head as the memories of her past faded in the back of her mind. Her son had come far, but she was still his mother. So she replied to the advice of the infinite hyperversal haven. "I'll be sure to tell him then." A moment after, she waved her hands towards the two empty cauldrons and spoke out. "Let's have quintessence and infinity." The cauldrons buzzed with power as wisps of colorless and cerulean light began to flow into them, their lids closing as another round of planolith crystallos refinement began in these vibrant constructs. Behind the dazzling figure of the quintessential dowager, a mountain of planolith crystallos was already beginning to form, as by the time that ruination multiplied them. Oh, utter brilliance was occurring in this space, and this was only the alchemy hall. In an entirely separate space, the blacksmith's forge shone with an even more astounding radiance, as low-grade and middle-grade armaments of extremity were designed and forged quintessentially. All of this happened in the background. All of this occurred and came to fruition because of a single being. And currently, this being sought to attain even greater heights of power as the further he went, the grander all authorities within the infinite hyperversal haven became. So at this moment in time, the will of the extremity of quintessence buzzed as its vision shifted to the murky waters of the gradations of extremity. Currently, he withstood a heavy pressure and might at the very zenith of the murky layer of the fourth gradation of extremity. The absence of any changes within these murky waters told Noah many things as he looked around. He had established the quintessential annals of extremity, broken off from Vitalis and Vacuous, and had the whole infinite hyperversal haven in a state of existence and non-existence, and yet no changes had occurred within the murky waters of the gradations of extremity. As if Noah's quintessential annals, Vitalis and Vacuous annals, as if none of these affected the gradations of extremity. The only change Noah had seen so far was what had already occurred since he attained existential extremity authorities. The fact that he didn't have the overabundance of chains holding him down and making his progress across the gradations so extremely slow. It may mean that if there were any primogenitors or controllers of other existential extremity authorities, they may be capable of the same versatility and movement across the gradations of extremity as Noah. This thought also caused him to be even more careful, as all this time he was able to gaze at trillions of others from the first gradation of extremity until now. But what if in these murky waters he met another entity who could freely move and be cognizant like him? What if he came across the ones above extremity in these murky waters and gradations of extremity? The thought caused his will to spread it all around him as the dazzling colors of light around his body retreated. His colorless, hyperversal, existential, and quintessential extremity rune scriptures pulsing with authority as around his body, illusory chains appeared all around him. From illusory, they gradually became real, as if he was chained in these murky waters of gradations of extremity like all others, and he then gazed at the demarcation of the fourth and fifth gradations of extremity as the extremity of cultivation proceeds forward without issues. The extremity of ascendancy seeks even more transformations. His existence had grown enough and been refined enough by the pressure in the surroundings to the extent it now felt weak to him, and his body warped as a moment later. He disappeared without any fluctuations and reappeared above within the entry of the murky waters of the fifth gradation of extremity. Ever clearer, slightly less murky. His surroundings didn't buzz as everything was concealed, but waves of authority and pressure were surging into him from all around as his existence refined it. His extremity rune scriptures increased by the thousands, and his soul ascended ever higher. This time he wanted to see just how far his extremity authorities could take him. He wanted to see what gradation he would manage to reach with the terrifying concepts he held. Chapter 28:35, Quintessential Ascension 1. The waters of the fifth gradation of extremity. They were filled with much more clarity, as if the further up one went, the clearer it would become. At the lowest rungs, Noah's powerful will could see the figures of entities around him still. They were sparse and spread out, but they were there. Around their bodies, there were significantly fewer chains compared to those below them in the gradations of extremity, and yet they were still bound by chains. Their expressions were stern with their eyes closed, as if they sought to understand more about extremity. With their bodies fluctuating as ever so slowly, they tried to inch upwards, but their movement was abysmally slow, as if they may just be inching upwards for all their lifetimes before the concepts supporting their souls waned and ever so slowly lost their extremes, their very existence beginning to break down in time. Unless they could reach a higher level, unless they stayed true to the extremes of the concepts that took them here. For Noah, it was entirely different. His concepts burned brightly as they were backed by the might of 3 existential extremity authorities, and over 100 other concepts that had reached terrifying extremes all surged within his existence as he had no chains holding him down. Within a few milliseconds, he acclimated to the tremendous pressure bearing down all around the early stages of the 5th gradation of extremity. His existence acclimated and became strong enough to beat it, and then tens of thousands of his colorless, cerulean, and amethyst hyperversal, existential, and quintessential extremity rune scriptures began to circle around his body. For any others watching, they saw no fluctuations, as they could only observe Noah's figure to have illusory chains like everyone else. But Noah could see a vastly different sight, as for him, everything was full of brilliance and colors, as a moment later, he took a step. Hum! His existence buzzed as he instantly disappeared from the early waters of the 5th gradation of extremity, and shockingly, his figure appeared at its middle point. Boom! And the pressure of the waters around him were 10 times as heavier as before, but they only caused quintessence, infinity, and tyranny to buzz as Noah still resisted it. Ascendancy pulsing and devouring the seething tendrils of the waters nearby into Noah's existence, as once more, his existence underwent refinement and elevation. His consciousness expanded wildly again as here, his will was drawn to a far distant location, as there was a connection there. When his eyes opened to the far distant location, he could see the chained figure of Extremity Solarium. Her figure was bathed with a thin film of light as many crimson hyperversal extremity rune scriptures swirled around her, and yet even she was proceeding forward slowly. Noah only glanced in her direction as thereafter, he focused on the elevation of his own existence and the rapid production of rune scriptures of his concepts. At this point, he reached 250,000 rune scriptures, as thereafter, his body effortlessly acclimated to this middle region. 600 milliseconds had passed since he arrived here, as thereafter, he took another step. And he once more covered great distances in a short period of time, his quintessential ascent only being stopped as the waters of the gradations of extremity became ever heavier and more intricate to pass. But he arrived at the furthest waters of the 5th gradation of extremity. Pressure barreled down from all around and threatened, led to crush Noah. And yet his tens of thousands of rune scriptures, swirling as his concepts withstood every single ounce of force. Your existential extremity authorities forcefully withstood and crossed distances that took others years or eons to cross. A quintessential achievement. He was cutting through everything with great force due to his concepts. But as he went further, he came to realize that the waters of the gradations of extremity were truly not so simple, as even though his concepts withstood the pressure, his swirling extremity rune creaked and shuddered as he approached the demarcation between the 5th and the 6th gradation of extremity. Even though he was withstanding the pressure and making progress within milliseconds where others would take years, his rune scriptures still trembled at the immensity all around them. The extremity of cultivation seeks to better understand this conceptualization of the gradations of extremity. The extremity of tyranny states, why seek to understand when its rules can just be abolished and remade anew? The extremity of infinity sees an endless path ahead that can be scaled and traversed. The extremity of quintessence proceeds forward with caution. For others, it took years. For the one who brought to fruition the existential extremity authorities of quintessence, infinity, and tyranny, boom! The line between the 5th and 6th gradation of extremity stands tall. As profound and hard to scale this line is, since the extremity of cultivation has reached it, it has become a wall that can be scaled. He breathed steadily. No wall could not be scaled, so long as he was capable of reaching it. Crack! As tremendous night pressed on Noah all around, a fissure opened up on the line of demarcation right in front of him. The moment this fissure appeared, Noah's concepts buzzed and began to emerge rapidly, their numbers increasing by tens of thousands as with a surge of brilliance. Shah! Noah slid through the fissure and into an entirely new realm. No murkiness could be seen. The waters were supremely clear as the chains crossing throughout were filled with a transparent light, the sixth gradation of extremity. The moment Noah arrived, his gaze changed as he felt a great strain on his very existence, all of his concepts supporting him as from all around, heavy and thick transparent chains battled towards him. It was the job of his concepts, of his extremity rune scriptures, to oppose these chains, as they swirled around him powerfully, expressing their shocking might, as many of them were dead paths. Powerful concepts of extremity others couldn't even fathom. Because of this, he had used brute force with them to go from the first gradation of extremity to the sixth gradation of extremity within a few seconds. Chapter 2836, Quintessential Ascension. 2. He had used brute force to very quickly cross into the sixth gradation of extremity, an achievement that even the Sumerian architect nor Extremity Solarium had made over the years, as he achieved it within seconds. This was the obscene testament to his ridiculous quintessential zenith concepts. This was his shocking privilege and power as the primogenitor of three existential extremity authorities. Which other entity could say that as soon as they attained extremity and stepped into the first gradation of extremity, they could ascend to the sixth gradation seconds later? Nobody could. Nobody but the extremity of quintessence. But the sixth gradation of extremity seemed to be inherently different, as even though Noah felt an even more fearsome pressure descended as his concepts withstand it, the pressure still crashed through his extremity scripture and crushed into him like waves that began to cause injuries to his existence. The shocking pressure acted as fuel, causing his extremity rune scriptures to jump by the hundreds of thousands. His existential extremity authorities became even more refined and even more grandiose. And yet he was also feeling his existence continuing to be injured. The extremity of quintessence shines illustriously and sees through all pretenses. The extremity of cultivation nods at the assertions of quintessence grimly. Noah's mind buzzed as he saw even as his extremity rune scriptures exploded past 600,000 and rapidly continued upwards. Their swirling around him withstood the pressure of this gradation he had arrived into. But the waves always passed through the gaps of his extremity rune scriptures and crashed into his existence, hounding him and threatening to push him down constantly. Why was this? His existence buzzed as he found that even though he was withstanding the pressure, because waves continued to drag through his rune scriptures and smash into his existence, he couldn't climb any higher. Ever so slightly, he was even being pushed down as he only maintained his current position through the sheer power of his existential extremity rune scriptures. In such a moment, his will spread out as he looked around this gradation of extremity. Others may not be cognizant, but since he was, he could see and understand more. And near him, he saw the visage of an old man. His back was hunched as his face contained traces of age and vicissitude, with clear, transparent chains entrenched into his existence and causing his progression to be so immensely slow. And yet this being stood stably in his position within the sixth gradation of extremity. As his will that was in a unique state of existence saw this, his soul buzzed a moment later as he spoke out. I see. The reason why, even though his concepts were powerful, the terrifying clear waters of the sixth gradation of extremity still posed a tremendous challenge as they bypassed his extremity rune scriptures and constantly smashed into his existence. On the body of the hunched old man at the sixth gradation of extremity, Noah could see that his crimson hyperversal havenly extremity rune scriptures were not just swirling around his body. They held a flow. Yes, a flow. And not just any flow, but his extremity rune scriptures held a sense of interconnectedness as he eliminated many possible gaps that the crushing waves of the sixth gradation of extremity could squeeze into, with only a few areas of his body still having gaps left behind as the clear waves entered through them and caused his figure to be stopped in place. When Noah saw this scene, he instantly understood the intricacies of the sixth gradation of extremity. He looked at his own extremity rune scriptures that were swirling around him haphazardly. They felt no flow, no sequence. They were powerful, yes, but they were each on their own. Each one radiated a terrifying authority, as each rune scripture held its own halo of light, none intermixing with each other, as of course this created many gaps that the terrifying pressure of the sixth gradation of extremity crashed into and caused his body to remain in place. He may have even been knocked down if it weren't for his colorless hyperversal existential and quintessential extremity rune scriptures, that due to the quality of quintessence, they shared the same color and standing as their glow did not repel as much. But for Noah to have his own flow of the hundreds of thousands of extremity rune scriptures and close the gaps of authority due to them proudly standing in what their own extreme signifies, he had to converge them. The myriad of different concepts of extremity has to achieve a profound convergence and resonance, their light no longer repelling each other as they would meld together seamlessly and birth a unique flow, a convergence of multiple concepts that had escaped their own extremes, something known as a dynamis of extremity, whom his existence pulsed gloriously as he instantly brought quintessence forward. Those who had already converged their concepts into dynamis before they reached extremity would have an easier time in doing so again, since these concepts were already interlinked before. Noah started with quintessence, as it held the colorless light that had even affected all of his other concepts apart from tyranny and infinity, and it would be substantially easier to converge other concepts under this same light. So his existence buzzed with understanding as he sought to withstand the crushing waves of the sixth gradation of extremity by doing something all others had to do before or after they arrived here. He had to bring together the flow of multiple extremes. As for this, Noah began with quintessence. Its profound colorless light recalled all the concepts it had converged to before attaining extremity as an instant after. Its colorless light pulled upon providence, and the tens of thousands of extremity rune scriptures of providence flowed from different parts of Noah's existence and began to attach their colorless light onto quintessence. A blinding light bloomed as a hue of gold ever so slowly emerged. A few gaps were closed off as the moment Noah did this, he began to feel a shocking sense of power begin to rise. After providence, destiny, karma, fate, and fortune followed, as a flow of golden light melded even more gaps, the new sensation Noah was feeling becoming even more pronounced as his soul buzzed. His soul buzzed as what it could see was gradually changing. It was as if a brand new reality was unfolding before him, as if his vision was being altered to see something he couldn't see before. Chapter 837. What is extremity? 1. It was unique. Noah's vision always saw more things than others, and this was elevated to a ridiculous level when he was capable of attaining the state of quintessential unity of existence. His existential extremity authorities also quite literally allowed him to see and be cognizant of the gradations of extremity. Now he came to the realization that from the first gradation and through the fifth gradation of extremity, one could barrel through them so long as they held enough quantity or quality of concepts of extremity. But when stepping into the sixth gradation of extremity, this wasn't enough. Just a swirling mess of extremity rune scriptures was not enough, as one had to make sure their extremes were intricately flowing across their existence. So theoretically, someone like Noah, who held over 100 extremes in his body, would have an extremely difficult time to bring them all together. And an entity who only pursed a single concept to extremity may be able to attain a unique flow that didn't allow for any gaps around their existence. But would a single concept be strong enough to take them across the initial gradations, or even simply withstand the pressure of the sixth gradation? The answer was likely no. Thus, entities pursued extremity in multiple fields, and they then sought to converge their extremes into dynamis of extremity. Noah already had a skeleton of convergence of his concepts before they reached their extremes, as now, he only had to bring it all together. His first convergence, though, ended up involving an existential concept as the very first one. Who in the vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains could say their dynamis of extremity held an existential concept of extremity and multiple quintessential zenith concepts alongside it. The answer was no one. Whom? And this first convergence caused his vision to see something else as for the first time, Oraculum was truly coming to fruition. After quintessence began everything, providence, destiny, karma, fate, fortune, Elysium, wisdom, dreams, and multiple more concepts of extremity that had their scriptures affected by the colorless light of quintessence all began to flow in together. And the scene Noah saw wasn't just the fact that above him, the gaps were becoming slowly covered as singular circles of rune scriptures began melding into each other. He could see at the very center of the flow that had begun to form the concepts themselves, extremity itself. It seemed to be an ability of the forming oraculum, but it caused his mind to enter a daze as if he was looking at his very own concepts for the first time. It wasn't just that he could see them more clearly, but he saw that even though their rune scriptures were affected by quintessence and made colorless, at their core, each of his concepts of extremity held their own color, their own identity, their own emotion, desire, longing, weaving, and intent. Weaving, intent, what their extremes stood for and sought to do. Noah saw that even though they were majorly affected by quintessence, each concept of extremity held its own profound longing and intent. And once Noah fully realized the intent of the concepts of extremity, he shockingly found that he wasn't just able to see their current flow, but illusory golden pathways of where they were intending to go. This scene caused his mind to buzz and illuminate, as among the melding concepts entering under the umbrella of Oraculum, he came to focus on the concepts of the remaining 9 decreta as he grasped onto their intent, their very sources entrenched in his soul, and he pulled them towards the flow. Quintessence controlled as he altered their current pathway and flow to match the other concepts already converged into Oraculum. And, Sha! All remaining concepts relating to decreta seamlessly joined the flow as over 25% of his body was now entirely covered by a colorless light with absolutely no gaps. His body stabilized in the 6th gradation of extremity. He saw the source of ascendancy blare with a deeply hidden golden light as the clear waters of the 6th gradation of extremity burned and turned into flows of authority that came to further elevate his existence and cause the propagation of even more extremity rune scriptures. But Noah wasn't fully paying attention to this, as his very existence was still stuck on the new vision he could see concepts of extremity in, his soul feeling as if he was on the cusp of grasping something extremely critical, and that it was just outside of his grasp. At this moment, his vision saw the amethyst color among the many sources flowing within him shine brightly. He felt what this brightening of color wanted to do as he understood it even before. The extremity of tyranny urges you to focus on your current feeling and sensation. Even before the prompt came, he foresaw and understood what the concept of tyranny wanted to portray. Thump! His existence felt a metaphorical heartbeat as everything within him told him to test what he was currently seeing. He had to better understand and fully cement the epiphany of the vision brought by Oraculum. He needed to see and affirm whether what he saw for himself was something he could see on all others. What if he could read and understand the sources, the very desires of the extremes of other entities? This thought caused a major part of his vision to redirect from the clear waters of the 6th gradation of extremity as the eyes of his main body opened wide. He needed to test something, and naturally for this, he needed a test subject. But there were abysmally few who could even match him at this moment as he quickly locked onto a possibility and the figure of his main body disappeared. Inside of a record, within the obsidian difficulty of the existential raid rift. Boom! Cataclysmic light smashed into the figure of the obsidian raid boss, Oppenheimer. Around him, records of Enders of Extremity lay defeated as he alone, unfettered and filled with the extremes of the extremity of quintessence, he faced the terrifying entity who was known as the Sumerian Architect. Chapter 2838. What is extremity? A sect. It was an experience that the Sumerian Architect would never forget, as truly, even though she stood at the 5th gradation of extremity, the raid boss she faced, who was designated to be at the peak of the 4th gradation of extremity, was matching her power. By challenging the Obsidian difficulty solo, she had taken care of all other Enders as the only enemy left was Oppenheimer. And even though she had the upper hand, the massive body of this raid boss seemed to have the vitality of multiple entities at the 5th gradation of extremity, as the extremes of prana and life coursed through him, which, when supported by the existential light of quintessence, allowed him to survive the relentless attacks of someone as powerful as the Cimmerian architect. But soon enough, she would grind his vitality values out entirely, as her intuition told her that the rewards would be grand. They may even be enough to stabilize and propel her towards a distant but close 6th gradation of extremity. Kamo. Her words came to a halt as the massive figure of Oppenheimer also came to a stop. Because in front of their eyes, a terrifying authority bloomed as shockingly. The extremity of quintessence himself appeared within this record. When he did, the eyes of the raid boss, Oppenheimer, flickered brightly as he bowed down and kneeled. While the Cimmerian architect, I know I didn't fucking challenge the tyrannical difficulty. Come on. She felt exasperated at the unfolding reality as towards her words, the extremity of quintessence had his eyes shining brilliantly as his voice was resolute. Just a minor interference for me to test something. Attack me. Think of it as a spar. She felt his gaze lock onto her as her eyes became somber. A spar. She had fought him just seconds ago in a battle with other entities at the 5th gradation of extremity, before they were all almost smitten out of existence. At that time, she could somewhat match his power. This was before he had fully undergone his changes as the primogenitor of multiple existential extremity authorities. So where would he be now? And how close could she match him when she herself had quintessence coursing through her? Her soul buzzed. And her concepts followed as she laid the groundwork with the extremity rune scriptures of intuition. And her very existence was alarmed a moment later, as the moment she made the extremity of quintessence her target, an unbelievable sense of danger and oppression was transmitted from intuition. The Cimmerian architect felt this sensation. And then there was Noah. What he was seeing was an entirely new reality. The moment his words had finished, he saw the few 100,000 extremity rune scriptures swirling around the existence that was the Cimmerian architect. In the past, she was someone who controlled polychrome hyperreversal existential extremity rune scriptures of vacuous. Her power was profound, and yet at this moment, Noah very clearly saw the extremes of her concepts. Their intent, purpose, weaving and longing, and he saw how they looked in comparison to his own extremes. Like flickering stars holding their own dim glow in the form of extremity rune scriptures, they exerted their extremes. His concepts looked different. They looked like weavings of dazzling suns that shone with a blinding radiance, while when he gazed at the concepts of the Cimmerian architects, they looked like dim stars. As he saw this and compared the two, the forming oraculum seemed to bloom with information, as he instantly understood why. The image of his concepts as blinding suns showed their endless radiance to eventually have the capability to light up and become something even more. Something existential. His concepts were dead paths, and thus they looked different. His other concepts that weren't initially dead paths, they also held similar blinding radiances, as after being taken to the height of quintessential zenith concepts, their difficulty in attaining extremity and traversing across the gradations was just as high. But their brightness left open a possibility for advancement, as it seemed a dead path was one of the pathways to turn a concept into something existential. Did this mean Vitalis and Vacuous were dead paths, or did they take other routes to become existential? Or were they always existential to begin with, and they were never even dead paths? This question buzzed in Noah's mind as he came to gaze upon quintessence, infinity, and tyranny. Their colorless, cerulean, and amethyst colors were not mere blinding suns within Noah's body, but each one held a dazzling iridescent glow that covered his whole existence entirely. He could now see the pristinely circular auras of colorless, cerulean, and amethyst layered over his body, over his very existence as their brilliance stretched out for light years. Their brilliance went on to cover everything round him, stretching out all the way across the very infinite hyperversal haven. They affected everything. They held an intricate balance over his existence, that currently seemed to be capable of supporting these three fairly new existential extremity authorities. As their authorities grew, the breadth of his existence had to also grow alongside them, as if he wasn't strong enough. They could not progress forward. This also brought into question whether he could elevate more concepts into the existential level and still support them with his existence. It felt like there would be a limit, but he didn't know what this limit currently was. 1 more? 3 more? 6 more? He couldn't tell. But currently he began to feel. He felt the sensation and the very intent of the extremes of the Sumerian architect before she even activated her rune scriptures to channel their authority, as at this moment he came to focus on the foremost authority she put forward: intuition. In his vision, it flickered with a white light as tens of thousands of rune scriptures, holding a portion of its source, were going to light up in order to read the current reality and upcoming reality before it sent this feedback into the mind of its master, the Sumerian architect. But since Noah could see what this extreme intended to do even before it did so, the amethyst glow of tyranny that was circling around him, but also had its light illuminating light years all around, he manipulated its intent and obscured the extremity of intuition from exerting its authority. And the eyes of the Sumerian architect became alarmed and somber as she found out intuition could not reach much about what was coming, and due to such a shocking phenomenon, it only warned her of immense danger, as if the enemy she faced was not that could be understood by even the extreme of intuition. The extremity of a concept. What exactly was the extremity of something? The furthest point of something? The utmost limit there could be. The apex, pinnacle, or the very zenith of what that thing was. At this moment, when Noah observed the extreme of the concept of intuition swirling around the Sumerian architect, he felt its intent and weaving clearly as if he were looking at a clear formula. He felt its longing and emotion as this concept sought for knowledge. It sought to understand things before they unfolded, and it longed for nothing more than to understand, even without understanding, to act on instinct. The moment Noah was able to read its longing like this, you have grasped the weaving of intuition. His own existence blinked as an instant later, he saw a colorless, hyperversal, quintessential extremity rune scripture of intuition form in front of him. Since he was able to gaze at and see the intent of this extreme, its longing and desires, naturally, he was able to attain its extremity after understanding its desires. And under him, this extreme could be elevated to an even grander level. His existence buzzed. The emerging existential dynamis has allowed you to begin understanding the weaving of extremity. You are at a point of unfathomable brilliance. Chapter 2839, The Weaving of Extremity. 1. He was standing at a point of unimaginable brilliance. The rims of his pupils were now burning with golden flames as he looked at the Sumerian architect. Her eyes showed tremendous somberness, as after intuition only told her of danger, she mobilized the extremity of epoch to apply herself. And yet under Noah's gaze, he was able to clearly see the intent of this concept even before it grew. He was able to see its weaving before it even exerted its extreme. He saw the flow of the extremity rune scriptures as before it could assemble its authority and express it outwardly. Noah now understood that he could disrupt its flow. The easiest way to do so was just like how he had disrupted the flow of intuition with tyranny a moment ago. This was because tyranny, quintessence, and infinity were pervasive and all around his domains and records. He could mobilize them anywhere within the infinite hyperversal haven. But even if he didn't use these, he mobilized the intent of plot. At this moment, he could better understand the extreme of plot, as while grasping its longing, the speed at which it could erupt was that much grander as it thought. Colorless light warped from him and instantly appeared near the body of the Sumerian architect, and it went on to wrap around the flow of the rune scriptures of epoch. Before they could express their extremes, they were overcome. Suppressed, oppressed. It was such a stifling thing that twice in a row now, the Sumerian architect had simply tried to do what she always did and mobilize her concepts of extremity. And yet she came to find none of them could even activate and express their extremity. When this reality dawned on her, her eyes trembled with utter disbelief and shock as such a sensation was not entirely foreign to her. She had felt something similar when she sparred against the only two beings she cared for in the vacuous hyperversal domains, entities at the sixth gradation of extremity. But even what they could do was not as disastrous as what she was facing now as against them. She could at least activate her concepts of extremity, as only thereafter did she realize they could easily counter her concepts and stop them. This was the gulf she always faced when she gazed at the sixth gradation of extremity. But why did this unfathomable entity in front of her seem so much more terrifying? At such an instance, she bellowed out. Her existence didn't like this sense of pressure and oppression, so it shone brightly as epoch, time, chronology, intuition, omen, aeon, and more concepts began to weave together. In the distance, Noah saw this scene as the golden flames around his pupils became ever brighter. He saw more than 10 concepts surrounding the Sumerian architect begin to resonate with each other as the haphazardly swirling rune scriptures around her attained a flow. The gaps over large parts of her body became closed as he found that now it would become just slightly harder to weave the weaving of the concepts resonating and converging with each other to form a flow. Harder. But for him, not impossible. He read the flow of the converging concepts of extremity as its identity emerged in his mind. Ephemeris, the pupils of the Sumerian architect trembled. She heard the name of the absolute dynamis of extremity she was just calling forth from the mouth of her current enemy. Around her, reality was about to begin distorting, with a domain of her dynamis about to be expanded, as in it, vicissitude and age would scream grandly as under its authority she could express the most terrifying extremes of her concepts. And yet, Noah's burning eyes read the flow of the forming dynamis. He saw the mixing of emotions and desires within it as a moment later he mobilized the intent of quintessence around the Sumerian architect. He saw the blinding radiance representing quintessence listen to his directions as he had it insert itself into the forming flow around the Sumerian architect. And he disrupted this flow. An ancient hazy purple light of eons and age that was about to form was halted in its place as shockingly, the dynamis never truly formed to express its authority. The eyes of the Sumerian architect felt what occurred around her with a dazed expression. It was only after a few milliseconds passed that her dazed expression left her face, her intent for battle entirely fading away as she brought her hands down. "Fuck!" She cursed out as she didn't attack any longer. She didn't need to. She understood that the being in front of her had somehow, in the span of seconds since he attained extremity, grown so much that he could not stop her very concepts of extremity from even expressing their authority. Why the hell would she even think of fighting such a being? As for Noah himself, he saw the dismantling of the dynamis of Ephemeris as the longer he saw the parts it was made of. The more he understood the intent and longing of the extremes that were trying to make it as, you have grasped the weaving of epoch, you have grasped the weaving of chronology, you have grasped the weaving of aeon. He came to understand the extremes of another entity seamlessly, even without plundering or plagiarizing them, as brand new colorless rune scriptures formed around his body. This was the result of the profound state he was in as Oraculum formed and generated this shocking new viewpoint for him. He wanted to explore it more and understand the weaving of his own concepts and other concepts of extremity as his gaze locked onto the visage of the Sumerian architect while he spoke out. You mentioned powerful entities in the higher gradations of extremity or primogenitors, making their abodes deep within recorded or unrecorded histories. Do you have the coordinates of such histories? His words emanated shocking battle intent, as the Sumerian architect could see Noah wanted to find other targets to bully, those who may be even stronger than her as he wanted to test himself. Chapter 2840, The Weaving of Extremity, a sixth. He wanted to test himself, as for this, they may have to go the depths of the aeonic annals of extremity, where the gazes of the ones above extremity may not be as pervasive. Their gazes could reach there, but they may have some more time before these entities took action. But even if their gazes were pervasive, there was Noah's own capabilities as he held the distinction of an indeterminate, quintessential I existence. He was in a constant paradoxical state of uncertainty, of existence and non-existence, as apart from the quintessential annals of extremity, it was nearly impossible for other entities, authorities, or annals of extremity to perceive him. This state he attained wrapped around his entire existence, as at this moment he could also wrap it around another existence easily akin to the expansion of a domain. So he gazed at the Cimmerian architect, whose eyes flickered with many emotions in a short period of time before she sighed. I know some, but I do not want to implicate them in all this. If any records of me or you discussing or talking with them are established, they will likely be targeted by vacuous and vitalists as well. And unlike me, I don't know if they will make the same choice just as quickly before everything is too late. A solid reasoning in reply, but Noah simply waved his hands at it as he spoke powerfully. I won't appear there for a discussion, and my existence will not even be perceived by the ones above extremity. As he spoke, Noah's body flickered to release hundreds of colorless, hyperversal, quintessential extremity rune scriptures of intuition that had rapidly begun to propagate. They were made visible to the Cimmerian architect as they flowed to instantly appear in front of her, with Noah expressing their extremes into the Cimmerian architect as when she saw the rune scriptures of what used to be just her concept expressed by him to show her his intention. Fuck. She cursed exasperatedly again before sighing and throwing out a bundle of light towards Noah's figure. I won't go, just don't go too hard on them, and if possible, see if they can make their entry into your lands. The bundle of light contained information of histories that had occurred eons ago, histories of events that had long come and gone in the river of time. As for any lesser being, even getting such information would mean nothing to them, as how can they traverse across the aeonic annals of extremity? But for Noah, it was only simplicity. He grasped the bundle of information as his eyes burned with even grander golden flames, his figure dividing into two as both of his parts disappeared an instant later. All that he left behind was an exasperated Cimmerian architect and a kneeling raid boss who now rose calmly. The Cimmerian architect ground her teeth as after Noah left, the dynamis of Ephemeris began to circle around her once more. I've got some anger and frustrations to release, big guy, you ready? Wah! Reality pulsed and distorted as if an eon full of age and time was being brought out. At such a scene, Oppenheimer's figure only began to buzz with pristine waves of destiny and providence supported by existential extremity authorities as he replied in kind. You are lucky to have met the current me before my authority was elevated to match the current authority of the concepts the Master has achieved. You are even luckier for not witnessing and facing the advent of the raid boss, Commander Feng. But of course, luck is also part of your strength, so let us continue. The rune scriptures of the raid boss began to move. When the extremity of quintessence grew more powerful, so would the things enacted by him. This wouldn't occur right away, as it would be a gradual change, but even this was bound to be drastic. At this moment, the rune scriptures of the raid boss, Oppenheimer, began to have their own flow. Ho! And opposite him, the Cimmerian architect bellowed out in frustration as she sought to be the first to clear a raid rift. But she was not the only one. In another record, inside a golden difficulty existential raid rift, burning flames of hatred pushed away the distortion of space-time as Lilith took on a devilish form, horns rising on her head as she bellowed out powerfully. Cut through it, Ayame! Her voice called out to the past scion of infinite extremity, as from her, immense heat formed into a pillar that tried to pierce through the barrier of time in front of them that was covering the devilish time unveiler. Only a few hundred of their party members remained, as the rest had faced false deaths, with their consciousness remaining in the raid rift as mere observers to see how their remaining party members would perform. So long as they cleared the raid rift, all of them would gain the rewards. R.I.P. Like a veil, the barrier of time around the devilish time unveiler tore from the immense heat that was now backed by genuine infinity, and Lilith instantly took this chance to pass through it as in front of her, a trident of molten Apollyon formed with hellish flames of hatred to sink into the chest of the raid boss. Yet her soul shuddered as, on the devilish time unveiler, she saw a cruel smile forming, even as the vitality values of this entity neared the bottom. He grasped his dagger of time as the curvature of space-time twisted. Lilith's figure beginning to move in reverse as its vitality values were slowly returning to their state moments ago. No, she couldn't allow this to happen. If he recovered here, they wouldn't be able to get near him again with the few remaining forces they had. But how? Lilith's eyes widened as she saw a path. She was already within his domain. She just had to make sure it remained fierce and that he didn't return. But for her current power to achieve that, she could only do it one way. She closed her eyes as she uttered out, "Heart of hatred." Her heart stopped beating. It then burst in a painful sequence and became a shocking force as a moment later, all of her existence began to burn with terrifying extremes of hatred as from her body, the illusion of a radiant burning heart formed. The will of Lilith gazed behind her as she sent her thoughts to the only other person more powerful enough to finish things off. Finish it off, please. She wanted to have the glory, but she had to take this path in order to give others a chance. Behind her, Ayame's eyes shook as she saw the resolve of this being who burned her very existence, and a moment later, boom! Hellish flames exploded out with such hatred that the reversal of time around the devilish time unveiler was stopped. The extremes of hatred, they burnt with great emotion and longing as the barrier around the raid boss became torn. Who? Ayame breathed out while watching such a scene as she pulled every ounce of the aspect of infinity from her existence. Blue flames rising around her as she locked onto the shocked figure of the devilish time unveiler, whose hands were forced apart with the dagger of time. Her figure then turned into a singularity of blue flames as she struck out while carrying the will of the daughter of hatred who had burned herself. Chapter 28:41, The Weaving of Extremity. 3. Lilith watched the scene with a sharp gaze. Never before would she ever think of letting someone else have the spotlight. But in this past moment, she made a surprising choice, as even though she wouldn't be the one to claim the glory of victory, her efforts had led to it. Those who had faced false death would be allowed to watch the rest of the raid. At this moment, Lilith watched the blazing figure of Ayame scorch everything within infinite heat, sinking into the very existence that was the devilish time unveiler as the last vestiges of his authority that were ground down by thousands of entities, finally depleted. It was a surreal result. Whom? The space they were in trembled and shook as Ayame's figure rematerialized at the spot where the devilish time unveiler exploded into a bundle of quintessential light. Thereafter, a resplendent golden light shone out as a symphony of grandness bloomed. Thereafter, Lilith felt her awareness collected and returned into her body once more, as in the spot she faced false death. She once more returned. Due to clearing the golden difficulty existential raid rift, the penalty of the false death has been cleared. An astounding achievement. What you are? A celestial golden light flourished as the 9,999 participants of this rift all rose once more, their gazes rising up as there, in the space above the domain they were in. Golden clouds formed as above these clouds, massive multicolored treasure chests opened with glorious light. Within them, immense honor and loot seemed to be contained. Lilith gazed at it as before her eyes and the eyes of many others, dazzling golden prompts rose. But the prompts every person saw were different. The party you led is the first to clear an existential raid rift in the infinite hyperversal haven. An achievement worthy of being recorded in the quintessential annals of extremity. Your contribution in the clearing of this existential rift has been calculated. You hold the highest contribution in the clearing of this existential rift. Due to this distinction and being the first raid rift to be cleared, the chances to obtain the highest quality loot have increased quintessentially. You have obtained the low-grade Infinity Plenalith Crystallos. You have obtained the Zenith low-grade armament of Extremity Banner of the Disbeliever. You have obtained 9x early entry passes. Her eyes trembled. The highest possible quality loot within this raid rift. She actually attained a Planalith Crystallos of Infinity. Above her, a radiant crystalline crystalloid that shone like a blinding blue sun came down, in addition to a crimson-red banner and 9 rectangular-looking talismans. She was barely able to blink to see that above the visage of Ayame beside her, a similar cerulean crystalline star descended, along with a flaming sword. A apart from them, no others had such dazzling loot. At most, all 9,999 entrants apart from them had some sort of a planolith crystallis descending above them, but none were as bright as the ones above Lilith and Ayame. None contained the right for them to embark on an existential concept of extremity. Seeing such a shocking prize before her, Lilith reached out and grasped onto it tightly, bringing it to her blessed chest. As for her, the blinding blue light seemed like an endlessly shining star of hope that finally affirmed for her that she could truly rise to a shocking height of power from here on out. With a glimmer of light, she accepted her loot and was escorted out of the raid rift along with all others. After a mere blink of an eye, they found themselves within the infinite hyperversal haven. And all around them, fanfare still continued as their figures were shown a spotlight on, many eyes turning towards them briefly, looking away from the events of a shocking illusory screen that showed a terrifying battle of a tyrannical difficulty. Lilith cared not for the gazes as she began to absorb the infinity planolith crystallis right away. While Ayame, her reappearance caused the eyes of a few being to lock onto her as one after another, they made their way over to her. Ayame, you went ahead of me this time and attained something good, it seems. The figure of Erickson appeared. His tan skin shone with valiant radiance as he seemed like a prince originating from far lands, his slippers throwing off this glorious image as after him, pink flowers bloomed as a young man in a white robe holding a pink sword appeared. It was Atlas of the past, plumb sword of extremity. Following him was another young scion who had sculptures shining with a powerful light at his heel. Lodovico of the past, sculptors of extremity. One way or another, all had taken the widely spread blood source and were transported into the infinite hyperversal haven before being smitten out of existence, as now, these past scions who completed with each other met once more in a land of profound opportunity. But at this moment, one scion was particularly in the lead, as in her hands, Ayame grasped something that would actually get her started on a concept of extremity that would push her power to a fantastical level. The methodology of refining and elevating the power of Noah's existential extremity authorities with the infinite hyperversal haven as a whole had began smoothly as the first party cleared an existential raid rift. Noah was doing his part in this larger picture, as after ascending into the 6th gradation of extremity, he was able to begin the conference of oraculum that allowed for a stupendous capability to come to fruition. The capability to begin understanding the weaving of extremity. Initially, Noah had many theories when it came to just when he would grow capable enough to expand the extremity of extremity. As he now arrived on the precipice of this grand capability of understanding the weaving of extremity, he came to realize that this far-off dream may actually be possible at the end of this path. Chapter 2842, The Weaving of Extremity. A fourth. This was Noah's strong belief as he began to gain a deeper understanding of extremes. The more he delved into it, the more he understood their emotions and longings. The more he understood that the very concept of the extremity of extremity was not something to be taken lightly, not something that could be achieved so simply. He had initially thought that maybe after reaching the 9th gradation of extremity, this theory could be made into a reality. But he now understood that even if he had reached that height, it may have not been enough. The key lay in understanding extremity itself. The key lay in understanding its weaving, why and how the extremes of many concepts moved the way they did. And so he set out to understand this by observing his own extremes and comparing other extremes. He sent out a part of himself in the form of a clone, as at this moment he stepped outside of the infinite hyperversal haven and into the quintessential annals of extremity. Into a construct of records upon records that were in a constant flux of existence and non-existence. His will passing through it quickly, as with his eyes burning with golden flames, traced the records that the Sumerian architect had given him as within moments. Shah! He was within the aeonic annals of extremity. More specifically, in the vacuous annals of extremity, as like a fish in water, he swam across a myriad of records, as he didn't hold an ounce of fear on whether he could be discovered. The extremity of tyranny burns with ambition. His power was affirmed. His distinction as an indeterminate quintessential I existence remained true, as in his constant state of uncertainty, the gazes of the ones above extremities were that much further from him, especially so within these layers of records. He crossed through them seamlessly, as in time. Whap! As if he were tearing apart a veil, as if he tore open the pages of an ancient book that recorded eons of history. He arrived in a domain. It was serene and quiet, with its reality feeling a sense of a distortion as if the record was recently altered. This wasn't the state it was in before, because currently the skies burned with a hazy glow of white flames of anarchos. The land below being a sea of liquefied anarchos as atop them, a forge and a hall, radiating an air of refinement could be seen. In front of these two buildings, the majestic auras of two entities could be seen as, currently, they were adorned in white robes and sitting on the liquefied sea of anarchos while silently gazing at what could only be described as an obsidian coffin. A tomb that within it, Noah could feel traces of records, memories of none other than those of the Sumerian architect. These two entities were actually in mourning. They had altered this record and painted it white with anarchos, while adorned in white robes, they were actually mourning the Sumerian architect for them. Was thoroughly and undeniably dead. At this scene, Noah shook his head and said, "How quaint." Even though he had arrived in this record some time ago, his two words were the real indication of his ear in the instant moment. Boom! Boom! The burly man that was sitting down rose with terrifying authority as he came to lock onto Noah, the woman beside him gazing up with cold eyes and doing the same as even with this. Noah also confirmed something. Even entities at the sixth gradation of extremity could not sense his presence easily in a state of existence and non-existence. Even as these powerful entities rose, Noah felt his own existence pulse with brightness as his extremes radiated their longing. They began to weave as he tuned his senses and allowed them to run free. The extremity of paradox pulls upon the existential extremity authorities of quintessence, infinity, and tyranny. Schrodinger's quintessential domain of indeterminacy has been laid down in the surrounding records. W.A.! A mixture of colorless, cerulean, and amethyst lights flashed as Noah felt they weaving together under the banner of paradox, their authority instantly altering the surroundings records and placing everything within it in a state of existence and non-existence. This was only Noah being more careful, as now nothing within this domain would fall under the gazes of others. He did this for this purpose. But of course, when the powerful entities at the sixth gradation of extremity saw him do this, their extremes blared as they treated him like a powerful enemy. Noah smiled at this, as any misunderstandings would be cleared later. At this point in time, he just wanted to see more extremes and understand their intent. "They're weaving," I asked. "Who? Boom!" The burly man waved his hands back majestically as from his forge, an obsidian gold full body, armament radiating the aura of multiple pieces with the power of middle-grade armaments of extremity descended unto his body gloriously, along with a fiery obsidian white hammer that blared with perdition and anarchos. Beside him, the woman he sat with rose as a battle armament shimmering with an obsidian hue covered her gorgeous visage, a radiant white bow appearing in her hands as she aimed it towards Noah with blazing intent. All of this occurred as during it, Noah was reading the intent of the extremes of these two beings. The weaving of their extremes told Noah many things, as first and foremost, the anvil of Anarchos Sargon, the purifier of alchemy Ishtar. Their identities became clear to Noah. Sargon and Ishtar, those who shared an intricate connection to the Sumerian architect. At this moment, Noah saw that their bodies held not a single gap. Their extremity rune scriptures had a fantastical flow that pushed and pulled on each other, swirling around their existence as if they were dancing. As if they were enduring a performance across eons. It was why, even though he could read their flow, whap! Their extremes were still able to exert their authority rapidly, much faster than Elodie, as within an instant, the reality before Noah had a blazing white arrow shimmering with cataclysm near him, while an illusory hammer swung from below, intent of splintering everything above it. A battle with entities at the sixth gradation of extremity began like this. Chapter 2843, The Weaving of Extremity. 5. Those in the sixth gradation of extremity seemed to be much more adept at expressing the intent of their extremes, as they were even faster. Around the existence of Sargon and Ishtar, the anvil of Anarchos and the purifier of alchemy, Noah saw that the first attacks they sent out were mere expressions of their power, as before these attacks even arrived, they followed up with their true power. The flow around their body moved in a beautiful melody, and at the forefront were the spinning polychrome hyperversal existential extremity rune scriptures of Vacuous. They converged tighter and led the flow of multiple other concepts of extremity into the serendipity of a dynamis, of a type of power that caused the very records they were in to tremble and begin to shatter as this dynamis brought forth the extremes of non-existence to a shocking level. The anvil of Anarchos called out coldly, vacuity, a term connected to vacuous. It meant empty space, a space of utmost nothingness and non-existence. And this was the absolute dynamis of extremity that he put forth as his flow dictated that everything before him be erased. These were his converged extremes. They were so potent that the purifier of alchemy had no need to release any other authority, as even it would be swallowed up in the emptiness about to ensue. But when Noah saw the weaving of the many extremes, including vacuous, around the anvil of Anarchos and the subsequent expressions of their extremes, he actually smiled. Against all incoming attacks, he actually didn't urge any of his own extremes to retaliate, as his eyes burning with golden flames could see many things right now. And while the illusory hammer and massive flaming white arrow smashing towards him arrived first, he remained utterly as the moment they came to have an impact with his figure. No sound occurred, no horrific blast of impact. The massive hammer and flaming white arrow of Anarchos passed through him as if he didn't. At such a sight, the eyes of the anvil of Anarchos and the purifier of alchemy shone powerfully, with the extremes of the dynamis of vacuity coming right after. Wherever this authority passed, the very records were erased into a blank whiteness, as this whole landscape was being changed. And yet against Noah, he smiled ever brighter as at this moment, oraculum truly showed its majesty. He read the weaving of the extremes contained in vacuity. And after he did so, his soul buzzed in joy as he felt like he didn't need to oppose the extremes of these concepts. They each held desires they wanted to express, and he wondered whether he had to always cancel out the extremes of other beings with his own that were more powerful. At this moment, he went a different route. He didn't deny the oncoming extremes that were erasing everything out of existence. He understood their intent as his figure stayed utterly still, the endless white nothingness coming to envelop him as he went with its flow. His extremity rune scriptures of quintessence, infinity, and tyranny simply imitated the flow of the extremes of multiple authorities as they gave him an instant of a buffer, and thereafter, his very existence followed the weaving of the concepts contained in the absolute dynamis of vacuity. You are actively breaking down a dynamis containing more than 9 concepts of extremity. Vacuous has been excluded due to its unknown nature. You have grasped the weaving of nihility. You have grasped the weaving of the void. You have grasped the weaving of resiliency. You have grasped the weaving of the rancor. One after another, the concepts within the dynamis were broken down as Noah grasped their intent and understood their extremes to the extent that rune scriptures of these concepts blossomed all around him. Your understanding of the weaving of extremity has quintessentially been elevated. He performed a shocking fear as for him, it was just that. For others, the faces of the anvil of Anarchos and the purifier of alchemy turned somber as in their vision. Noah's figure didn't even make a move. A dynamis with polychrome hyperversal existential extremity, rune scriptures at its forefront had descended to erase everything, and half of this current record was now gone due to it, but this entity did not even make a move. He didn't mobilize any authority to cancel theirs. At this moment, he was the only thing standing serenely in the field of white emptiness, as if the extremes of their concepts would simply not work on him. When such a thought arose, the eyes of the purifier of alchemy trembled subtly as she thought of a possibility. Could he be? She didn't finish her thoughts. They were too disastrous to finish. But when she looked at that demeanor, at the utter confidence of their existence and power. She could only think of one type of entity a few of them had seen throughout the eons, the ones above extremity. Such a possibility arose in her mind. But this time, she didn't feel a sense of trepidation as her will gazed at the tomb behind them, thinking of the lost girl she had watched grow up who was wiped out of existence not too long ago. As anger rose in her heart, she gazed at the being standing in a field of empty whiteness as she called out with anger and pain in her heart. "You've already taken her from us. What more do you want? Us too? Will that satiate your cruelty?" The words came out rapidly, as they were instantly understood by the anvil of Anarchos beside her, as his gaze rapidly changed. It couldn't be, right? He gazed up at the lone figure above them that was now gazing down with a content smile. As at the words of Ishtar, he blinked, while his eyes pulsed with golden flames of understanding. She actually mistook him for having an identity of the ones above extremity due to the way he seamlessly handled the weaving of extremity. Chapter 28:44, The Weaving of Extremity. Sis, she mistook his identity, but at the end of the day, her words were actually not wrong. He had taken the Cimmerian architect away from them, but he didn't wipe her out of existence. His eyes pulsed with golden flames as he gazed out calmly while speaking. As interesting as the comparison is, I am someone else entirely, and Elodie, she is not gone. His eyes radiated grandeur as he spoke. He came to better see the weaving of extremity, as he affirmed that his current power could seamlessly handle entities at the 6th gradation of extremity. He also understood how their manipulation of extremes was, as now, he needed to fully understand the weaving of his own concepts while continuing to ascend across the waters of the gradations of extremity. So he spoke towards these two powerful entities, as now that he was here, and he read an intricate connection between them and the Cimmerian architect. He may as well put them to use. After all, he had the wondrous design that was the existential dungeon apocalypse that he was holding off on using until his forces acclimated to their extremes and became more powerful. But if he could put entities at the 6th gradation of extremity to use already, he could begin devouring the records and authority of Vacuous and Vitalis much earlier. Hearing his words, the anvil of Anarchos and the purifier of alchemy had their wills buzz as they looked at him sharply. They were pristine, powerful entities as their minds worked fast. The news he gave them was a shocking one, as if he truly wasn't among the ones above extremity, and he held news regarding Elodie. It had to be the last person that Elodie was fixated against. You are? Sargon grit his teeth while glaring towards Noah with blazing white flames. Could he be? The most recent honored one that should be entirely dead? If this were true, they were in as much danger as before when they thought he was among the ones above extremity, as wherever he went and whoever he associated with may just be smitten out of existence. Noah saw their many expressions and reactions as he spoke calmly while conjuring two colorless instance dungeon portals halfway between them. Listen to the weaving of your extremes and make a choice. Enter through these, and your records will be purged and baptized of anything to do with Vacuous and Vitalis, and you will escape the gazes of the ones above extremity while getting to see Elodie once more. But make that choice quickly, as even I don't fully know just how long and to what extent I can obscure the gazes of the ones above extremity. As he spoke, Noah's visage began to disappear. He left behind a shocking proposition that angered Ishtar and Sargon, as his presence alone could show a sort of link between them. And who knew how far-reaching the gazes of the ones above extremity were? After all, they held polychrome hyperversal existential extremity rune scriptures of Vacuous in their existence. They had this existential authority flowing through them, as just how much could its gaze be obscured? Ishtar grit her teeth fiercely while glaring at Noah's fading figure, her own body turning into a dazzling stream of light as she bellowed out, "Explain yourself! Shah!" She shot out as Noah disappeared with a glimmer of light, her eyes burning with waves of power before she turned towards the two colorless portals floating amidst the empty whiteness and disappeared into them. Ishtar! Sargon watched such a scene while his eyes danced with hesitation, but when he saw Ishtar sink into the portal seamlessly, he also grit his teeth and shot out, It was a surreal scene. When the purifier of alchemy first stepped into the portal, she felt a powerful existential extremity authority swarming on all sides as if she wished she could put up a fight and resist it. But she remembered the words of the entity that had just appeared as when she listened to the extremity of premonition. Her eyes formed a steely resolve as her uniquely flowing scriptures let down their defenses. And then, she felt the existential extremity authority of vacuous within her body and soul begin to burn as it rapidly began to be scorched out of existence. In the infinite hyperversal haven, the banner of quintessence flashed with brilliance as names constantly kept changing on it. A new name rising to the top 10 as it was none other than Elodie, the Cimmerian architect. Within a blinding flash of light, she returned victoriously from soloing obsidian difficulty existential raid rift. This was the highest difficulty of a rift to be cleared, and it was done so by a single entity without a party. Her figure was surrounded by brilliance as 9 treasure chests rotated around her, 8 of them containing vibrant planolith crystallis, as the last one held a crimson gold battle dress emanating the aura of a middle-grade armament of extremity. The eyes of the Cimmerian architect curved into a smile and seemed refreshed as she spoke, while taking stock of what she had attained. Haha, that's a good fucking victory. And all of this is loot. A dazzling, colorless quintessence planolith crystallis fell in her fair hands as her smile became ever brighter. Another existential extremity authority to replace the loss of vacuous hyperversal authority. And the brilliance of this one seemed to be that much more enticing as she laughed powerfully while putting the treasure chests away. At this same moment in time, space warped a light year away, as with it, a terrifying aura silently spread out to observe its surroundings. As the eyes of this entity began to open wide with shock and disbelief, her powerful will covered nearby hundreds of light years, and she managed to observe many beings, along with one with a refined and powerful aura who was laughing powerfully right now. The one she had thought to be forever scorched out of existence. She was actually... Her body trembled with a mixture of emotions as ultimately her booming voice echoed out only in the direction of the Cimmerian architect. "You're here fucking laughing as we remain in mourning this whole time?" The words caused the expression of the distant Cimmerian architect to quickly change as she recognized this voice of anger across eons of records. Her will buzzed and quickly located the fiery and gorgeous figure of the purifier of alchemy, whose hair danced around madly as she barreled towards her like an explosive keg. She was coming right at her with the power of someone at the 6th gradation of extremity, as the expression of the Cimmerian architect rapidly became stern as she called out, "Ishtar, wait." Boom, boom. Heavy bursts of authority exploded out as at this moment, new entrants of much greater quality began to appear in the infinite hyperversal haven. Chapter 2845, The Weaving of Extremity. The second. Her body was reforged with quintessence as vacuous hyperversal authority was scorched out of her existence. After her transformation, strands of dark and white hair flowed to her shoulders as her fair skin glimmered with brilliance, her eyes holding 3 pupils within that glowed white, black, and gold. The purifier of alchemy, in all her glory, looked as pristine as currently multiple extremes that she controlled weaved together into a flow that bombarded itself into the Cimmerian architect. Selfish! Boom! Her body was still adorned in a white mourning dress as her power at the 6th gradation of extremity caused the Cimmerian architect to feel like a heavy weight was constantly pressing down on her. Light years away in the far distance, Sargon appeared after Ishtar arrived to see this scene, as his will spread around with disbelief. The new lands he was in needed to be ascertained, yes. But he felt like a massive weight had been lifted off his shoulders when he saw the Cimmerian architect alive and well. He sat down on the space he was floating in and materialized a golden cup that came to be filled with a red liquid, his dark hair messily falling on his burly and muscular figure that was forged from iron working as he tipped the drink in his hands forward. "I did not fail you, my friend." His gaze was deep. He thought of the dying woman on the 7th gradation of extremity who was on the cusp of achieving the 8th gradation, and yet she came to him, dying while holding the tiny hands of a small girl. He remembered the words she said to him even now. Her name is Elodie. Please take care of her. She entrusted this girl to him and Ishtar, who just happened to be at the time as they competed in forging and alchemy. That time, he questioned how an entity of the 7th gradation of extremity could be dying. How the many concepts of extremity she held and all that power flowing in her existence, how could she possibly be withering away while her existence faded? In her final moments, the dying woman had smiled with reluctance, as if she didn't want to die, gazing deeply at the young girl she was leaving behind, as her very existence began to splinter. The eyes of the young girl she had brought were hazy and blank, as if she couldn't see the scene in front of her, and she was only standing as a mute that would continue to do for 1,000 years from this point. But right before the dying woman perished, she spoke the words that told Ishtar and Sargon who they needed to keep away from, and who had caused someone of such a height of power like her to be dying, as if she were a mere mortal entity that hadn't even grasped the flow of mana, the ones above extremity. Her final words. She then looked lovingly at the young girl she left behind as her body collapsed and began folding into itself, her extremes waning and dying as Sargon and Ishtar watched extremity rune scriptures dim and die right in front of their eyes. This was how they came across Elodie, and they watched her grow up to who she was up until moments ago when he really thought he had failed his dying friend's last wishes. And what was more vile was that the daughter she entrusted them with had also perished at the hands of the same entities as her mother. But no, there she was, Ishtar. Boom! You never fucking listen. The purifier of alchemy was cursing while dishing out a loving punishment, which also showed where the Sumerian architect got her foul mouth from. As Sargon watched this scene, he sighed with relief and contentment while speaking out, his voice only echoing around him. Am I correct to assume you to be Noah Osmont, the most recent honored one? He spoke into the surroundings as if he knew there was a powerful will that may be listening. After all, with his eyes at the 6th gradation of extremity, he could see something. And currently, he saw the brilliance of more than 2 existential extremity authorities serenely floating across every nook and cranny of these new lands he was in. You would be correct. Wow! His surroundings fluctuated as a celestial man adorned in a royal purple robe appeared, his stature tall and standing above many others, as his devilishly handsome looks and demeanor instantly caused all wills light years nearby to halt and come to stare at him. In the distance, even the visage of Ishtar stopped, as Elodie finally had the chance to breathe, the figure warping and slipping away as she actually came to float behind Noah's recently appearing figure. Fuck! You would have warned me that you brought them over. Her disheveled appearance still showed pristine beauty, as her forehead glimmered with a dazzling scripture. She breathed heavily while gazing with defiance towards the faraway Ishtar and looking cautiously at the nearby Sargon. At this scene, Noah's eyes still burning with golden flames saw something unique. He saw the flow of quintessence, infinity, and tyranny all around him. Yes, but in addition to this, he was also seeing the flow of plot, the extremity of plot. Currently, its weaving was gleeful, as its flow could be seen wrapping around himself, and then onto the many beings around him. Plot. Noah came to understand this extreme more as it was silently allowing itself to flow into the reality around him, ever so subtly moving the unrecorded history towards the direction it considered ideal. The authority it was expressing ordered on the same stage was not really paradise, and its weaving was growing ever more powerful as it made this be the next thing to elevate itself forward. But then, Noah also saw the golden intent of something that wasn't as visible as all the others. But when he focused on its weaving, he found it focused on himself the most with astonishing brilliance. It was the extreme of the protagonist. Like a silent king overseeing all others, it now bid its time tightly around Noah as its extreme was Noah himself. The extremity of the protagonist. Its intent was Noah. Its weaving was Noah. Noah was the very extreme of the protagonist. Chapter 2846, Ushering Apocalypse unto Vitalist and Vacuous Domains. Noah's surroundings buzzed as the flow of extremes around him became even more intense. Sargon and Elodie quieting down and gazing towards him sharply. He was wrong. plot may not be the next one to advance after all, as the protagonist that had its weaving become so intricately connected to Noah himself may just be the next one to take this step. After all, the weaving it was trying to achieve was too grand. Its weaving was to make Noah the leading figure, the main character of not just the infinite hyperversal haven, but of the eons of records that existed outside of it. For that to happen, reality would distort and fold to his will, as the implications of the weaving of the protagonist were too grand in the large scheme of things. Noah gazed at its silent royal grandeur as he committed himself to understand the weaving of extremity more and more in the days and weeks to come. He came to the conclusion that if he truly understood it at its zenith, doing something like expanding the extremity of extremity would be as easy as raising a hand. And when that day came, woe to his enemies and any who stood against him. And when that day came, woe to his enemies and any who stood against him. The most recent honored one, you must have brought us here for a reason. In the eons of records I've seen and lived, I've never met a saint. Even the ones trying to depict themselves as saints have never been saints. So why are we here? A distance from him, Sargon, the anvil of Anarchos, asked lightly, while trying to grasp the unfathomable authority of this being. In the far distance, the record of Tatiana Nikolaevna, who had been silently waiting for orders this whole time, rose as she heard these words. The visage of Extremity Solarium also raised her head as her golden hair burned with brilliance. Her eyes filled with emotions as she had an idea for the answer to this question. At an even further distance, the intense aura of the fourth gradation of extremity pulsed around Svetlana as she also gazed forth towards the figure that seemed to be at the center of everything here. Many eyes were on him, as even his son currently had a gaze of extreme determination, as if he had undergone a great internal change. Why were they here? Why were any of them here? It was truly an existential question, as before Noah could reply. I'll take this one. While gazing with defiance at the figure of Ishtar, Elodie harumphed while beginning to speak serenely. We're all here because we were nearly scorched out of existence by the ones above extremity. And if we want the freedom to pursue extremity, or what may be above it, we can't be so damn fearful and weak in front of these fuckers sitting above extremity, right? The Sumerian architect could see a tiny, small semblance of the weaving of extremity as she spoke out with ingenuity. She was jumping on Noah's camp as after the burst of loot she just received, she was much more of a believer. In the distance, the figure of Ishtar began to burn with anger again while flying closer, as her words through gritted teeth could be heard. Why are you inserting your sand? Yet, the Sumerian architect didn't give her a chance, as she actually came to float directly behind Noah, akin to standing behind an immovable shield as Ishtar had to come to a stop in front of him. And, in order to do that, we have to grasp the existential extremity authorities around us. You all see that over there? Elodie pointed towards the massive illusory screen depicting the shocking battle in the tyrannical difficulty. The figures of Barbados, Adelaide, and other valiant women filled with Noah's power could be seen raging against Ruination, who was seemingly growing even faster in strength than them. The extremes they expressed being shocking to look at. Battle power like that should be a minimum. Grasping quintessence or infinity like that should be the basics. Thereafter, Vacuous and Vitalis have to slowly get their authorities ground down and weakened as for this. Elodie breathed out as her fair hand pointed to the tremendous back of the entity she stood behind. This was as far as intuition could take her, and intuition told her to stop there. The Sumerian architect had set the stage. In front of her, Noah smiled calmly as like a regal emperor addressing his people. His voice echoed out across the infinite hyperversal haven. The means to elevate yourselves and existential extremity authorities are already there in the form of existential raid rifts. Now, to weaken the threat hanging above, the existential dungeon apocalypse shall open in a limited fashion. Wah! As he spoke, space began to twist and distort as in front of the massive cerulean existential raid rift portal, a blaring light of purple bloomed as an amethyst existential dungeon apocalypse rift portal began to bloom. A light of tyranny, a light of glory, a light of the conquest of the extremity of quintessence as he waged war not on the ones above extremity, but the very existential extremity authorities they held coursing across existence and non-existence. The existential dungeon apocalypse rift will grant twice the loot of the existential raid rift, and only extremity clones of those at the third gradation of extremity and higher are allowed entry in. The eyes of many watching and listening entities shone at such words. The visage of the Sumerian architect stared at the massive blooming purple rift with scrutiny as her intuition buzzed. The purifier of alchemy and the anvil of anarchos were silent as they took everything in. In a limited fashion, Noah said. He was moving with caution for the existential dungeon apocalypse, like the first ones would have Tier 5s, Tier 6 hyperversal extremities in the lead. Akin to what had happened to his home world where massive dungeon monoliths ascended and brought down apocalypse. In this stage of extremity of his life, he would be the one to send down dungeons to spread an existential apocalypse that planned to conquer Vitalis and Vacuous. And Noah knew that the moment this began, there would be no way back, as whatever enemies there were would become much more apparent. Their numbers, their power, their might. For this, Noah had to watch and understand carefully. But at this point in time, he was ready to give an initial run of the feature of existential dungeon apocalypse. Chapter 2847, Ushering Apocalypse unto Vitalis and Vacuous Domains. Within the infinite hyperversal haven, there were now two massive rift portals, one cerulean and one blazing with a tyrannical royal purple light at the very center as around them, an even more titanic extremity vein in the form of an infinity symbol has multiple Alithian havens drifting in its celestial system. The many entities within, whether they be from the past 7 clans or inheritances of Vitalis and Vacuous hyperversal domains, they all gazed towards the two portals with scrutiny, as at this moment, a bundle of light fell above the head of each entity, the third gradation of extremity and higher, containing information on the newly introduced existential dungeon apocalypse and what it would entail. The figure of Henry, bathed in tendrils of liquid gold light, also felt the bundle of information fall in his head as he looked towards his father, who was surrounded by entities at the 5th and 6th gradation of extremity. He then gazed at the massive illusory screen that showed his own mother and the other queens of the infinite hyperversal haven fighting against a powerful foe. He thought of his loss at the hands of Oppenheimer. He gazed behind him and saw the fractured pride of the Emperor Penguin, the visage of Kazuhiko stroking his katana while sighing deeply. The figure of the Oathkeeper with a grim expression and the crack in his eyes of blazing fire. Each of them were their own people, as they held their own hopes and dreams, and he had let them down. They followed him, and he let them down. He reflected on himself as he felt every single cell within him, holding the highest purity of his father's lineage. He felt the particles of quintessence, infinity, and tyranny flowing within him. He then felt his own dazzling destiny as it coursed through his heart and very being. In this state of reflection and despondency, Henry Osmond entered a unique state of mind. Who was he? For the past weeks and months since his conception, he was always trying to forge his own path and live up to the vast and endless shadow of his father. Forge his own path? But why? Why did he try to forge his own path? He was the son of the extremity of quintessence, the son of the ruler of the infinite hyperversal haven. He was his only progeny as this distinction. Was it not a part of him? The extremity of harem smiles with a guiding light. Why did he try to forge his own path and deny a part of his existence? Why could his unique and only position as the son of the extremity of quintessence not be a part of his strength? Henry's body began to radiate a terrifying colorless light as quintessence rose. His bloodline woke up with ferocity as it was crying out, as if asking why it had taken him this long. Pa! Colorless hyperversal existential extremity rune scriptures of quintessence began to flow around him. And as his existence buzzed under this shocking epiphany, he borrowed the power of quintessence and pulled out his power that he had unconsciously suppressed this whole time. And shocking prompts began to bloom before his eyes. The extremity of cheats makes the incoming alteration and distortion of reality flow with ease. In a unique state of quintessential unity of existence borrowed from your lineage, you have grasped onto some of the capabilities of your father. You have embarked on the path of the extremity of nepotism. You have embarked on the path of the extremity of the cabal. You have embarked on the path of the extremity of progeny. You have embarked on the path of the extremity of bloodlines. You have embarked on the path of the extremity of royalty. You have embarked on the path of the extremity of scions. His body shone with a blinding authority as a dense cluster of colorless, hyperversal, quintessential extremity rune scriptures began to swirl around him, each one brimming with its own intent and emotion, as the son of the extremity of quintessence fully accepted his position. He accepted who he was, and he then took this to its extreme. The 12-hour penalty for a false death has been erased under the extremity of nepotism. The amount of loot you can gain from all existential raid rifts is now tripled. The extremity of bloodlines allows your already pure lineage to attain a profound closeness and purity to the extremity of quintessence. Wah! The aura Henry radiated quickly exceeded the third gradation of extremity as he fully stepped on the fourth gradation, his visage shining with a blinding golden light as he began his own ascension upwards. The son of the extremity of quintessence would be capable of forging his path with power from this moment on, as he relied on who he was to an alarming degree. In the distance, Noah looked at this and smiled silently as his gaze came to focus on Ishtar and Sargon. His mere gaze spoke louder than words as these two entities looked at each other, their bodies radiating a blinding light a moment later as identical forms of themselves appeared beside them. It was two extremity clones of the Tier 6 anvil of Anarchos and the Purifier of Alchemy. Ishtar's gaze was cloudy as she looked sharply at the figure of the Sumerian architect floating regally behind Noah, her eyes flickering and locking with Sargon a moment later as she sent him a mental message. A chance to get back at them for what they did to Aryanis was not even a possibility before. With this, there actually may be a way to stand against them. Within the span of a nanosecond, they began to share mental messages with each other as Sargon's eyes held deep mysteries and understanding. Maybe. But missing an existential extremity authority within me feels slightly hollow. I won't be able to fight as per normal. Premonition tells me he'll take care of that. Before he could finish his words, Ishtar replied to him while nodding towards Noah, who held a smile of understanding towards them. Amongst those who had achieved their stage of power and could begin reading the intent of extremes, understanding came easy, as after ascertaining the intent of the extremity of quintessence, the clones of Ishtar and Sargon made a beeline towards the royal purple existential dungeon apocalypse rift portal and disappeared with a flicker of brilliance. Chapter 2848, Ushering Apocalypse unto Vitalous and Vacuous Domains. Third. When Sargon came to once more, he found himself transported to an entirely new domain. Seemingly enclosed in the depths of a celestial star, a domain as big as a large world filled with walls glimmering with hazy purple crystals could be seen. As one went towards its center, the purple crystalline earth rose up akin to a mountain as at its peak. A grand throne radiating the grandeur of tyranny stood empty, but in front of it, 3 blinding planolith crystallos floated serenely. You have arrived in the raid boss throne room. The extremity of systems affirms your distinction as the first existential dungeon raid boss and asks you to choose between the 3 existential extremity authorities to traverse. Sargon's eyes flickered as he remembered Ishtar's words. Noah Osmond, the most recent honored one. It seemed they had much to learn about this being as freely he was able to produce 3 middle-grade planolith crystallis of 3 different existential extremity authorities. Sargon's burly figure, forged by years of smithing, rose towards the peak of the crystalline mountain as he gazed at the 3 dazzling circular crystallos. He tried to read what their extremes stood for. He tried to understand them, but they were too complex for him to grasp the intent of. So he listened to his existence and reached out towards the dazzling amethyst planolith crystallos. He chose tyranny as the moment he grasped it. A blinding light shone that caused the other crystallos to disappear. And Sargon took his seat on the purple throne gloriously while he began to absorb the middle-grade tyranny planolith crystallos. You are embarking on the path of the extremity of tyranny. The first existential dungeon raid boss appeared and took his place as in another domain within the records of the feature of existential dungeon apocalypse. Ishtar also sat on her throne as a blinding light of infinity was grasped in her hands. They were the first two entrants. Back in the infinite hyperversal haven, the Sumerian architect calculated and deduced as an extremity clone of hers formed soon enough, surging into the purple rift of light, as her main body still remained close to Noah. A clone in the existential dungeon raid, and the main body grinding the existential raid rift. I'll collect enough crystallos to break through the 6th gradation soon enough. Her eyes shone with brilliance as she planned ahead. Around her and across the vast infinite hyperversal haven, many extremity clones of entities at the 3rd gradation of extremity and higher were formed as they all quickly entered the massive purple portal. The seer of Sema shook her head while the extremity of foundation stood beside her cane currently buzzing with power as she also formed a clone. All right, let's hope this existential war is the war to end all wars. Otherwise, I really will just retire. She spoke as if she was an aged-old lady, even though her existence was more powerful than any common Tier 4 hyperversal extremity. With a flash of light, she and tens of thousands of other extremities were wrapped by the purple light of tyranny as they joined a path of profound conquest. At the same time, Noah and the infinite hyperversal haven were monitoring everything to ensure the construct enacted would work as planned, with Noah making the definitive command at this moment, as his will echoed out silently at this moment. Let 2 existential dungeon monoliths descend, one in vacuous hyperversal domains and one in vitalist hyperversal domains. Tyranny blared madly within his heart. The extremity of apocalypse cheers on with indeterminate glee. The extremity of entropy is enthralled by the ensuing chaos and disorder. The extremity of paradox is eagerly interested in seeing the results to unfold. The extremity of systems watches its design closely. The extremity of quintessence fearlessly pushes the gears forward and commences the feature of the existential dungeon apocalypse. A blinding royal purple light of tyranny shone. The purple existential dungeon rift portal, causing a shocking pulling force that seemingly grabbed a tremendous amount of authority from the infinite hyperversal haven, the titanic extremity vein coursing with authorities, visibly showing tendrils of such pristine waves of energy surging from it into the purple rift. And with a flash of brilliance, an irreversible step was taken. The weaving of extremity entered a new stage. A new form of warfare was unveiled. The extremity of quintessence observed closely as at this moment he could feel 2 monoliths crossing existence and non-existence, crossing myriads of recorded and unrecorded histories as their destination, the 2 domains, within the haven of Anarchos. A sea of white flames churned chaotically as the head of a huge white serpent could be seen swimming serenely, its power at the 1st gradation of extremity prevalent as all around it. The sea stretched out for light years. It was known as a 3-eyed light flame serpent. Its eyes gave off a look of magnificence and power, as this area was its domain. And it, boom! Its thoughts came to a halt as the reality light years above it seethed. The pride and magnificence in the eyes of the light flame serpent fading to be replaced with terror as reality above became torn. From the torn reality, records seemed to be spilling out as a massive purple monolith the size of a cosmos descended. Its mere existence radiating a shocking amount of power that caused anything near it to feel a sense of suffocation. The moment it appeared, its royal purple light began to spread with a terrific pulling force as it seemed like the very surrounding reality was being drawn into it. But not a nanosecond since in appearance. Rumble! The space above and around it shook heavily, and an instant later, terrifying tendrils of vacuous extremity authority converged and thundered down ragefully onto the massive purple monolith. Boom! Boom! Within the flaming white sea, the body of the light flame serpent trembled in fear at this scene, as it stood anchored in its position, being the only entity privy to what happened next, as even with the heavy and terrifying thundering of obsidian tendrils of vacuous hyperversal authority, the massive purple monolith remained untouched. Its spreading purple light remained unfettered. A millisecond passed as just as quickly as the terrifying obsidian tendrils of light had descended, they faded. And thereafter, whap! Space tore open once more, as if records were spilling out into the open, and a figure that nearly caused the soul of the light-flame serpent in the far-distant sea to shatter just by being something near in proximity appeared. Chapter 2849, Ushering Apocalypse unto Vitalous and Vacuous Domains. Before, within the existential dungeon monolith that had made its descent in the haven of Anarchos, inside pockets of records and infoldings of reality, the raid boss throne room stood strong as in this one. Dazzling cerulean miniature dwarf stars flowed gorgeously all around in starry rivers, a cluster of them forming a massive throne that Ishtar now sat on as she was halfway through absorbing an ultramarine-colored planolith crystallos. Cerulean hyperversal existential extremity rune scriptures had already begun to swirl around her as her pupils radiated a powerful blue light. Beside her throne, the figure of the extremity clone of the Cimmerian architect could be seen, along with the visage of the record of the Annals Inquisitor and the Seer of Sea.